Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I can't shake the memory of that night. It was the first week of March 2019, a Thursday, March 4th, when the dispatcher's voice cracked through the static in my cruiser. The call came just after midnight. Land surveyor at the old Hollowbrook Quarry, reporting possible human remains embedded in concrete. Sheriff Callahan respond. I remember easing the rig down County Road 12, headlights slicing through a thick bank of fog that pooled over the fields. My breath fogged inside the cab, and I could taste the faint bitterness of coffee from hours before. Gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out, the surveyor's pale flashlight beam cutting through the darkness at the quarry rim. My pulse pounded against the rib cage of my chest, slow and heavy, like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I crouched beside the surveyor where he knelt, his hard hat cast askew, his face drawn tight. He pointed to a jagged break in the concrete slab covering the limestone seam. I knelt too, heart hammering. Beneath the cracked surface lay a gleam of bone, a finger, then an arm, brittle and frozen. I felt bile rise in my throat. The world around me went silent, except for the surveyor's shallow breathing and the distant hum of the lone security floodlight. The realization hit me like a blow. Someone had poured concrete over a body in a place nobody would ever look. We called it in, and by dawn the coroner was peeling away layers of hardened concrete. We exposed 3 bodies that had been trapped in that slab for more than a decade. 2 men and a third, whose features were already too marred to identify without forensics. All 3 had been bound, some bones broken by blunt force trauma. The concrete had cured around them in grotesque frozen husks. They hadn't simply died, they had been entombed, forced to remain where no one would ever stumble across them, until that night. As I watched the coroner's team wheel away the slab, I realized I'd never forget the way those bodies looked, half buried in gray stone, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. Back at the station, I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching me. Word spread through Hollowbrook. Population 8,200, scattered over 720 square miles of farmland and woods, by sunrise. I sat in my cramped office, shoulders hunched over a mug of lukewarm coffee, eyes on the stack of reports piling up on my desk. I felt the weight of every resident's gaze, real or imagined, bearing down through faded windows. Sparrow County had been my home since I was a kid. I'd risen from deputy to sheriff over 11 years. I knew every gravel road and country store. Yet this quarry, abandoned since the company went bankrupt in 2001, had become ground zero for something monstrous. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office, slipped under my office door without fanfare. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper bore a message in shaky, impersonal handwriting. Sheriff. The men in the quarry were not the first, and they weren't the last. There are 7 more sites around the county. I know because I helped him. I kept his secret for 17 years, but I can't anymore. If you want to find the others, look beneath the old Parkman Bridge. Come alone or I won't show myself. My fingers traced the letters again and again, as if I could call them back into neat shape. Every word felt like a threat. a promise that pointed to more bodies rotting somewhere under stone. I knew better than to trust a tip like this without proof. People desperate for attention sometimes faked confessions or sent taunting notes, but something in this letter screamed authentic, an admission dripping with shame and fear. I stuck a high-priority label on it and ordered 2 deputies to stake out the old Parkman Bridge at Crow Creek's western edge. They would stay hidden, watching for movement. I planned to approach openly, believing that any true informant would trust a uniformed sheriff more than concealed deputies. That night, I drove out under a crescent moon. The bridge, rusted girders arching over murky water, sat silent and foreboding. My headlights off, I parked 100 yards away and used the LED beam on my pistol to guide my steps across loose gravel. My radio crackled faintly, then fell into dead silence. The breeze shifted branches overhead, sending shadows dancing across the bridge's supports. I found a small gap in the rocks at the base of a support, loose stones that formed a crude hiding spot. My gloved fingers slipped under a flat stone, and I hauled out a sealed plastic container. Heart thundering, I cracked it open. Inside was a crude, hand-drawn map. 7 X's marked across Sparrow County, scrawled in the same shaky handwriting as the letter. Folded beneath it was another note, typed this time almost clinical. I watched you arrive with backup. I understand, but it means I can't trust you yet. The map shows where the others are buried, 17 in total. Check the location nearest the water tower first. When you find them, I'll know I can trust you, and I'll explain everything. I'm sorry I helped him. I was young and afraid. I gasped, lungs seizing as if the night air turned to ice. The 2 deputies stayed silent in a ditch 20 feet away, their presence only a faint rustle in the weeds. I stuffed the map into an evidence bag, sealed it, and closed the container. My mind raced. 17 more bodies, carefully hidden where no one would look until now. By protocol, I called the State Homicide Task Force, but I warned them I'd investigate the water tower site myself first. Someone out there was watching my every move. 4 hours later, before dawn, an excavation team arrived at the water tower, an overgrown lot where a rundown machine shop once stood. We circled the lot with our lights, watching for any movement. The wind carried the stench of spring thaw and rotting leaves. I stood at the edge of a shallow trench, eyes darting over the ground as one of the forensics techs swept a metal detector over the soil. A dull beep, and he knelt, uncovering a fragment of concrete about a foot square. The next beeps came faster. Heart hammering, I joined him. We peeled away sod and dirt until the concrete slab surfaced. 2 bodies, entrenched in the hard slab, emerged as we chipped away. A woman's boot, caked in dried mud, stuck out. Nearby lay a second body, also female, her wrists bound by rusted metal that had long since fused with the concrete. I swallowed bile, stepping back as the techs worked methodically. Even through gloves, I could see the distorted handprint where someone had tried to claw free before the concrete set. The ground around the slab felt unnatural, like a bruise on the earth. We called it in and secured the perimeter. By noon, word spread. Sparrow County held more secrets than anyone dared imagine. As I watched workers haul the slab onto a flatbed truck, a hollow ache settled in my gut. These weren't random victims. Someone had deliberately chosen spots where no one would look. And they'd kept going for years. Over the next weeks, we moved from site to site, following those 7 X's on the map like a hunter tracking prey. An abandoned grain silo where rusting husks of corn stalks still lay in gray fields. A wrecked barn, its roof collapsed and framing splintered. Its sidings weathered into ghostly boards. An old farmhouse off Peters Mill Road, silent except for the whisper of wind through broken windows. Each place yielded another concrete slab, 6 more in total. We found 11 more bodies, 9 men and 7 women altogether, with trauma and skull fractures consistent with blunt force blows. Every body bore signs of torture before the concrete covered them. These were not quick deaths, they were slow, agonizing ends. The slabs were dated from 1998 through 2005, then nothing, until the quarry discovery in 2019. Every time we uncovered another slab, the cold iron of guilt clenched my insides. I kept thinking back to the first string of missing person cases we'd logged in the early 2000s. Runaways, hitchhikers, transient drifters nobody reported missing. Their names, faded in file cabinets, seemed to leap back to life with each new discovery. I spent long hours at my desk cross-referencing incomplete records, searching for patterns. Most of the contacts hinged on late-night sightings or abandoned vehicles on rural roads. Details that drifted away in time because who cares about a stranger out past midnight? The killer used society's indifference as camouflage. No one knew how many eyewitnesses had passed near potential sites, oblivious. I drove county roads, looking at glittering porch lights in hollow houses and silent tractors frozen in plowed fields. My phone buzzed with unending texts, lab results, media calls, worried inquiries from neighboring county sheriffs. I barely slept, haunted by the thought that those victims called out for help in whispers, never reaching an ear. My reflection in darkened windows looked gaunt, eyes shadowed. I caught myself gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. At night, my radio squawked static for what felt like hours. Then came another note, this time delivered to my home mailbox at 302 Maple Street, Hollowbrook. I found a prepaid disposable cell phone taped under the mailbox's flag. When I flipped it open, a text awaited. You found them all now. I'm ready to talk. Drive to Campbell's abandoned farm tonight at 10 o'clock. Come alone. I'll be watching to make sure. I stared at it long enough that the amber porch light outside my house leaked into my kitchen. I thought about protocol, how the state investigators wanted to set up a tactical team, how backup should accompany me. But something told me if I brought guns and uniforms, the true informant might vanish. The note's tone was desperate, someone terrified of exposure. So I made a decision. I would go alone. At precisely 9:50 p.m. that night, I loaded my flashlight, revolver, and a pair of latex gloves into my cruiser's console. I switched off the overhead light so the cabin was pitch black. I slipped into uniform quietly and drove south on County Road 15, headlights illuminating the stray clouds drifting across a pale moon. Campbell's farm, foreclosed nearly a decade ago, sat at the end of a rutted gravel lane. By the time I parked, the engine's hum died away, replaced by the trill of insects and a distant dog's bark. I stepped out, boots sinking into damp earth. My flashlight beam caught an old 2-story farmhouse, windows boarded up or gaping, the paint peeled like sunburned skin. Out of habit, I checked my shoulder for my radio microphone, silent. No backup. Just me and that disposable phone, the last lifeline to a confession. I crept forward, flashlight tracing the rusted fence posts leading to a sagging barn. The wood boards trembled under some weak winter wind. Somewhere, a loose window shutter banged rhythmically. My gut tightened. I thought back to all the slab sites, the agony frozen in stone. Here, in this once proud farmstead, I felt something stir, as if the land itself held its breath. I pressed my back against the barn's corner, the rough wood scraping my shoulder, and peered around. Moonlight slivered through broken roof rafters, pooling on the overgrown weeds that choked the yard. Nothing moved. At 10 o'clock, as the note instructed, I dialed the number on the disposable phone. My fingers stilled over the screen when the line clicked open. Before I could speak, a voice rasped through. "In the barn. On your left, I'll be standing under the single porch light. Don't come any closer, or I walk." Then silence. My heart sloshed in my chest. I flicked my flashlight beam to the porch. The single bulb flickered above the broken door, casting a sickly yellow glow. Under it stood a silhouette in jeans and a hoodie, shoulders hunched, head angled down. I swallowed and walked toward her, each step measured. Gravel crunched so loud I thought she'd hear. "I'm Sheriff Callahan," I said softly, voice echoing in the hush. The figure raised a pale face. Hollow cheeks, eyes rimmed red. She looked familiar only in her terror. "My name is Elaine Morgan," she whispered, voice trembling. She stepped closer under the porch light. Her eyes flicked to the barn door, then back at me. "I helped him," she said, voice thick with regret. "I helped him move the bodies. I never killed anyone, Sheriff, but I watched him do it. He made me." I clenched my flashlight, trying to steady my voice. "Who is he?" I asked. She glanced down at her scuffed boots. "Robert Egan," she said. "Concrete contractor. He was my neighbor, then my boyfriend. He started in '98. He, would find drifters, hitchhikers, people nobody cared about. He said they were human waste. He'd break them before he poured the concrete. I helped him build the forms in his storm cellar, where he kept them alive until he was ready." I felt bile rise again. The night air felt like cold lead. "Show me," I said, struggling to keep calm. She nodded, leading me to the farmhouse's side, where an old hatch rested under warped boards. She eased it open. A dank scent rose. Cold earth mixed, with rot and something metallic. My flashlight beam swept down to reveal concrete footprints. A rusted bucket tipped on its side, and chains anchored into the floor. The cellar was big enough to stand, dank walls drooping with mildew. The air was thick and stiff, like it trapped fear itself. Elaine pointed with a shaking finger. "Here's where he poured the first slab, '98. He kept them alive for days before dragging them out." I imagined that tiny space packed with screaming victims. A surge of anger rattled my bones. I hollered above my thoughts, "Did you ever try to run?" She shook her head. "I was 17. He was 36. I was scared. When he died, heart attack on a job site in 2005, I inherited everything. I couldn't leave. I was trapped in my own fear." I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did what you had to. Now it's over." I guided her back up, careful with each step. Outside, the moon had slipped behind clouds, and the yard lay in deeper shadow. I felt the darkness press in, but the night felt hollow, like something vital had already slipped away. I led Elaine to the cruiser and kept my revolver drawn until she sat in the passenger seat. She trembled so violently I half expected her to collapse. I shut the door and climbed in, radio crackling to life at last. "Dispatch, I have an informant here, Elaine Morgan. I'm taking her to the Hollowbrook station now." My voice felt flat, distant. I watched her pale profile as she stared at the cracked windshield. "Tell them to stand by for my arrival," I added. The dispatcher's voice was faint. "Copy that, Sheriff." I shifted into drive and headed back down the gravel lane. Headlights caught the broken boards of the barn before the road swallowed them. My chest tightened as I thought. In the quiet of my office, I'd have to stare at that battered journal Elaine would hand over. Pages documenting every killing, every name, every date. I knew the journal would be damning, but until I saw it, All I had was her trembling confession. I felt a hollow patience settle over me, as if my mind had already retreated from the world, leaving only fear in its place. The ride back to Hollowbrook was silent, except for the hum of tires on pavement and the distant chirp of crickets. When I turned in at the station, I flicked on the overhead lights to reveal a squad of state agents waiting in the parking lot. Flashing badges, serious faces. I grabbed Elaine's arm gently and motioned to bring her forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said quietly, "this is Elaine Morgan. She has information on Robert Egan's crimes, 19 victims." My voice echoed through the parking lot's emptiness. Behind me, the station's windows glowed like watchful eyes. Inside the interview room, I read Elaine her Miranda rights while her hands shook, leaving smudges on the wooden table. I kept my tone steady, even as my chest tightened with guilt. Guilt that this evil had festered under our noses for years. As she began to speak, describing how each killing unfolded, I sank into a chair, pen poised over a notepad. Her words painted pictures more vivid than any slab could. The soup of terror, the faint pleading in victims' eyes, the hiss of concrete slurry poured over helpless bodies. Hours later, the state investigators had the journal in hand, Robert Egan's own meticulous records. His penmanship was neat, methodical. Each entry listed a date, a name, a location. He detailed how he lured hitchhikers with offers of a ride to Hollowbrook, how he brought them to the storm cellar beneath his barn, and how he tortured them before encasing them in concrete. Elaine's entries, tucked at the end, spoke of her regret, her fear, her slow unraveling. When we emerged from that interview room, the morning sun was starting to rise, painting the walls a pale gold, but none of us felt that warmth. Over the next days, the news exploded. Hollowbrook Cemetery dedicated a small oak grove for the 19 victims. For families who'd never known their loved one's fate, it was bittersweet closure. For me, each funeral procession, each tearful relative's embrace felt like a warning. I would carry this darkness with me far past my tenure. I watched as Egan's property was demolished, bulldozers ripping into barns whose floors once held the living hell below. The storm cellar was sealed beneath a concrete dome, a cruel irony now meant to stand as a memorial rather than a tomb. I continued to patrol the dark roads of Sparrow County, but everything had changed. I drove past new missing person posters pinned to telephone poles, resolved to follow each one to its end. At night, I found myself checking rearview mirrors, expecting to see phantom figures in the fields, ghosts of those who never got help. My radio squawked with new calls, new alarms, but something inside me felt hollow, like a partnership with fear and regret that no relief could fill. Every thunderstorm, every bolt of lightning, illuminating the barns and silos brought a reminder. The predator who'd taken 19 lives by pouring concrete over them was gone, but the stain on the land and on me would never fade. Weeks later, I sat alone in my cruiser on County Road 18, flashlight trained on the cracked pavement. The fog crawled across the headlights. I remembered the surveyor's beam on that first night, the crack of broken concrete revealing bones. A report came over the radio, routine traffic stop, nothing serious. I flipped to the new journal pages on my desk and pinched the bridge of my nose. In the next breath, my message tone chimed on that disposable phone, still active, still taunting. I opened it. No text, no call, only a blinking cursor. And I realized someone had said 17 more bodies, but we found 19. The map delivered was incomplete. I looked down the road into the night, wind rattling my mirrors. My thumb hovered over the screen, but no words came. The county was quiet again, almost too quiet. I knew someone out there still watched, still held secrets under concrete. And I, Sheriff Drew Callahan, would spend every lonely patrol listening for the crack of the next slab. The early morning light made the county look deceptively peaceful, as if it had never witnessed such darkness. I stared out over the rolling fields from the station's back steps, coffee cup half forgotten in my hand, fingers stained with ink from the interview notes. The wind rustled through the cornstalk remnants, whispering faint echoes of memories I couldn't escape. I hoped to believe the nightmare was done. Robert Egan dead, Elaine Morgan in custody, all known victims recovered. But the blinking cursor on that disposable phone mocked any such hope. By late that afternoon, I found myself poring over old case files in the archives room. My office smelled faintly of mildew and dopamine cleaner, chemicals meant to disinfect but doing nothing to cleanse my mind. I sifted through names of transient men and women reported missing between 1998 and 2005. Most cases died in bureaucratic limbo. No leads, no witnesses, no priority. I tapped a pencil against my lips, eyes skimming each entry. At the edge of the microfiche reader's glow, I felt the same knot of dread tighten in my stomach. A knock on the door startled me. Deputy Ellis poked his head in, face drawn but polite. "Sheriff, the state lab called. They have DNA matches for 5 more victims, 2 of whom were never on our radar. One was traced to a shelter in Madisonville, the other to a vagrant shelter in Indiana." My mind reeled. "That brings us to 16 identified," I said quietly, closing the folder I'd been writing in. "How many are still nameless?" Ellis glanced down at his notepad. 3 remain unidentified, but with these new matches, we might get next of kin notifications out next week. I nodded, exhaling. "Good work." He left, and I sat alone in the dim archive room, the jerky hum of the fluorescent lights above punctuating the silence. Names, numbers, dates, they all merged into cold statistics on paper. But each was a person, a heartbeat gone silent. I rubbed my temples. I needed fresh air, a moment away from these endless files. I grabbed my jacket and headed outside. Sunlight slanted low, churning dust motes over the station's parking lot. I climbed into my cruiser and idled, watching my breath swirl in the chill. Normally, I'd get a call for a welfare check. Drunk teenagers passed out in a drive-through ditch, stray livestock on the highway. But today, nothing. The county had gone strangely quiet, as if the earth exhaled a collective sigh once we found the bodies. I shifted into gear and drove east, taking the scenic route along Hollowbrook Road, past abandoned barns draped in vines, empty fields awaiting spring planting, and the old cemetery where the new memorial stood. A single oak tree surrounded by granite slabs bearing 19 names. In the front seat, I kept that disposable phone within sight. No new messages. For a moment, hope flickered that whoever had led me to Elaine was done speaking. But part of me knew better. Someone with that level of guilt rarely stops. I stopped at the cemetery, stepped out of the cruiser, and walked to the memorial. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the worn tombstones. A gentle breeze made the oak's leaves rustle, producing a sound like low voices whispering secrets. I traced my fingers over the polished granite, reading each name. Henry Turner, Melanie Sanders, Louis Whitaker. I bowed my head and offered a silent vow that their stories would never be forgotten. The dusk air turned colder. I climbed back into the cruiser and turned the key. The engine's rumble felt too loud, too alive. I steered toward the town's outskirts, across the water tower lot where 2 of those bodies had been found. The once overgrown patch was now a fenced-off memorial ground with warning signs. No trespassing. Active crime scene site. Lights flickered from construction crews sealing the area. I eased past without stopping. That night, around 10, my cruiser idled at the edge of the old grain silo where we'd found 3 bodies. Radio traffic was minimal. Deputy Conway investigating a loose cattle call on Route 52. I watched the tree line sway under the moonlight, trees reflecting like dark sentinels. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a new text. "You're close. Good, meet me at the silo, alone." I felt bile rise again. Who was this? Elaine was locked up, her testimony recorded. The journal was in evidence. The concrete killer was dead. Yet, someone else reached out. I knew I had to go. My duty demanded it. I flipped on the cruiser's overhead lights and waited until Conway's cruiser disappeared around a bend. I shut them off and slipped out. Pistol drawn, heart pounding. Gravel crunched underfoot as I approached the silo's base. A faint glow from a dim bulb inside the broken roof sent streaks of light through rusted panels. I scanned the darkness. No movement. I pressed my back to the cool metal siding and listened. Wind whispering between gaps in the boards. The distant hum of an unseen generator, just like the generator in Egan's barn. My flashlight flicked on, its beam cutting through the night. I circled the silo, each step measured. Then I saw it. A dark shape crouched at the silo's far side, limbs folded, watching me. My pulse surged. "Who's there?" I called, voice low, steady, like a rock under floodwaters. A thin figure rose, wearing a hoodie, face obscured by shadows. "You found them all, Sheriff," the voice said, trembling, gender neutral. "Now you need to come closer. I have something for you." I shook my head. "Come out slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." I flicked the light toward the figure, revealing long, lean arms. The hood's shadow slipped backward. My jaw clenched as I saw pale skin, eyes wide, someone young, maybe in their early 20s. "You're not someone who knew Egan," I said. "I recognize that face." They flinched but held still. "I'm his niece, Emma Egan. I wasn't supposed to know. I was raised in Columbus. Aunt Elaine told me Grandpa died in '05. I never heard about any of this. When news broke about the quarry, I looked up holes in your local paper. That's when I found out the truth." I felt my chest tighten. "Why meet me here?" She stepped forward, boots clacking on gravel. "I found something in Uncle Robert's old workshop, a stack of photographs he took before the first killing. I have them on a thumb drive. They show places he considered, sites he scouted, even some victims before he killed them. I tried to bring them to the state lab, but they dismissed me. They said Elaine's journal was all they needed. But these photos, Sheriff, they show other people he considered but never killed. Maybe someone else is out there." My mind spun. "Show me." I holstered my pistol and motioned her to hand over the thumb drive. She produced a white USB stick with "Revidence" scrawled across it in black Sharpie. I pocketed it, but I kept my hand near my sidearm. "Take me to your car." She nodded, leading me to the road where she parked a beaten-up hatchback. In the dim glow of her interior light, she handed me a small envelope stamped with photos. I slid it into my jacket pocket. "Thank you," she said. I didn't know where else to go. She glanced toward the silo's looming walls, then back at me. "Be careful." I climbed into my cruiser and pulled away, wheels spinning dust. The darkness swallowed her figure, leaving only her dim taillights receding into the night. I felt an old dread crawling up my spine. Robert Egan was dead, Elaine Morgan was in prison, but Emma Egan's photo suggested there was more. Other names, other sites. My shoulders slumped. The radio crackled. Conway's voice reporting cattle grazing in the ditch. I flipped to silent mode. My eyes drifted to the thumb drive in my pocket. I wondered if it held living victims. People who never got on missing person lists because their bodies were never found. People who might still be alive somewhere, waiting for help. A chill wind rattled the windows as I drove back to Hollowbrook, and I realized the map that once seemed complete was missing something vital. A list of names, Emma whispered. Slivers of hope I held close. By the time I parked at the station, dawn was threatening the horizon with pale light. I stepped out, stiff-jointed, and felt the world shift underfoot. The county's quiet mornings used to bring comfort. Now, every breeze through the broken shutters and every rustle of leaves felt like a question. As I flicked off my headlights, Emma's words echoed in my mind. "Take care, Sheriff." Take care of what? I didn't know, but I did know this. The darkness in Sparrow County was far from vanquished. I unlocked the side door and slipped inside the station, the stale warmth of the waiting room greeting me. I cupped the USB drive in my hand, staring at the black Sharpie letters. The copier sat humming in the corner. I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. One step forward, and there was no turning back. The weight of those unseen victims pressed on me like an anchor. I punched in the code to the evidence room, retrieved the stack of hard drive photos, and carried them to my office. Scattered across my desk were newspapers with headlines declaring, "Concrete Killer Case Closed." I laid the photos face up among the articles. Grainy black and white prints of empty fields, isolated barn doors, old gravel pits, places I had walked past 100 times and never looked closely enough. I flipped through the images and stopped at a shot showing a pair of muddy boots lying upside down beside a derelict farmhouse. Same gloves, same boot marks as at Egan's storm cellar. My breath caught. I turned another page, an image of a small stretch of road, County Road 27, where a hitchhiker's thumb pointed at a weary traveler. Another photo showed a kid crossing a field at dusk, looking over his shoulder. The timestamp on the corner read 2003. I whispered, "God help them." My hands shook. Who were these people? More than shadows in memory, they had faces, lives, stories. Then I saw what Emma had warned about. A photo of a shape, draped across a broken concrete slab in the weeds of a forgotten orchard near Maple Grove. Mud caked around the edge and what looked like red stains, though they could have been rust. I slammed the images down. My heart pounded like hammers on an anvil. If that slab existed, if someone else had been hidden this way, then Egan wasn't the only one, or someone had continued after him. The implications crashed over me. More bodies, more families kept in the dark. My radio squawked again, puncturing my spiraling thoughts. Deputy Conway's voice. "Sheriff, we've got a report of lights in the old Mercer barn on Chieftain Road." I clenched my jaw. A barn that hadn't stood for a decade, just an echo in the farmland. "On my way," I replied, grabbing my flashlight. I slipped out of the station, mind racing with questions. Who was sending these photos? Why send them now? I felt exhaustion seep into my bones, but I forced myself to move. Tension hummed in my chest, quiet but persistent. I climbed into the cruiser and headed out, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. The Mercer barn loomed on Chieftain Road, just as Conway said. Moonlight cast long shadows over its broken beams. My headlights caught on the silhouette of a figure standing at the doorway. Arms folded, head tilted sideways like they were waiting. I killed the headlights and rolled down the window. Silence, except for the gravel shifting under the figure's boots. I stepped out, clutching the drive, trying to steady my breathing. "Who's there?" I called, voice low. The figure moved forward, emerging into a stray beam of moonlight. My breath caught. It was Deputy Ellis. Pale face, eyes wide. He looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. "Sir," he whispered, I got your message." My pulse quickened. I'd only sent that message in my head. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed. "I had to check. I've seen the same boots in these photos, my aunt's boots. She died in 2004. We never found her body. She was a drifter who bounced around from state to state, ended up here for a few days before vanishing. I hoped. The night air felt like ice. I lowered my flashlight. "Show me the photo." He slid the image across the hood, a grainy shot of a woman's collapsed figure in tall grass beside a concrete slab, boots identical to those in the photos of Egan's victims. Date stamped 2004. It was her, my deputy's aunt. I felt my knees buckle, everything blurred. My mind screamed, how many more? How many families still waiting? Ellis's voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Sheriff." I didn't know where else to go, but she was here. Somebody put her in concrete. My jaw clenched. I swallowed hard, tasting dirt and iron. I had to keep moving. I raised my flashlight toward the barn's open doorway. Inside, shadows slithered around broken stalls and rusted farm equipment. I flicked off the beam and followed Ellis into the darkness. Every step felt like wading through quicksand. In that moment, I realized the county's nightmare wasn't over. Concrete, dead and lifeless, hid more than just bodies. It hid our complacency, our failure to listen, to look. I guided Ellis to a broken window with shards of glass glinting like teeth. Inside, I saw a fresh outline on the ground. Disturbed earth, faint lines of a new pit under a tattered tarp. My gut twisted. Someone had started preparing another slab. I felt my chest tighten until breath was scarce. I knelt beside the pit, shoving aside rubble until my flashlight caught a smear of red on bare earth. Dark, dried, unmistakable. I rose, voice trembling. "Get back up now. We need a full." Team Ellis nodded, face as pale as the moon. I turned away, pulling out my radio. "Dispatch, call state homicide. Possible new site at Mercer Barn. Send everyone." My voice shook, but I forced it steady. I stared back at that pit, dread pooling in my gut. The darkness inside the barn's rafters seemed to curl and whisper. I realized the killer's legacy wasn't contained in 19 names. It was a darkness spreading, a secret too large for a single corpse to hold. As the first cruiser's headlights cut toward us, I felt the air grow heavy, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Tonight, I wasn't just a sheriff. I was a man outrunning guilt, driven by the need to unearth every secret buried under cold concrete. The pounding of my heart was my only companion, and in that moment I understood. The true horror wasn't how many bodies were found, but how many more might still be waiting for someone to shine a light into the darkness. Dawn had barely broken when the excavation crew arrived at the Mercer barn. When I led them inside, dust motes drifted in the fragile slant of early light. The barn's timbers groaned under the weight of frost-warped boards. I watched as forensic techs rang off the area, sealing the gap around the fresh pit we'd discovered. Red tape crisscrossed the broken window frames, muting the barn's hulking presence. My radio crackled with activity, state agents coordinating with deputies, a K-9 unit arriving to sweep for evidence, and a medical examiner on standby. I slipped my pistol into its holster, letting the adrenaline subside, replaced by a dull throb behind my eyes. My uniform felt tight around my shoulders like armor I no longer trusted. The team worked swiftly. prying wooden planks off rotted floorboards to extract the slab beneath. Each creak echoed like a warning. Whatever lay below had only been there a short time, too fresh for long decomposition. I knelt beside the pit's edge, fingers closing around shaving of wood mixed with soil. I inhaled. It smelled of fresh dirt and stagnant cold. Something in me froze at the thought of human remains mixing with that earth. By mid-morning, we exposed a concrete slab barely 2 inches thick, smooth as glass, and smaller than those we'd found before. It lay over shallow ground, newly poured. A handprint stretched across its surface, fresh and unweathered. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped my finger on the slab's edge and my knuckles scraped across smooth, wet, curdled residue. Whoever had prepared this had left in a hurry, leaving no time to properly finish. The slab was too perfect, too intentional, yet so obviously incomplete. Beneath it, Tex uncovered a body wrapped in burlap, head caved in, wrists bound. A woman, maybe mid-30s, dark hair matted with dirt. Her face was obscured, but the shape of her jaw and cheekbones almost familiar. My chest tightened. I remembered Deputy Ellis's aunt, and I felt my vision blur with unshed tears. We called it in. I radioed the other deputies to secure roads leading to the barn. Media crews soon gathered along the gravel approach, cameras pointed like vultures. I stepped outside to clear my throat before addressing them. I spoke in clipped sentences. Possible, fresh homicide. Evidence of foul play. We ask the public to avoid the area until we complete the scene. Their lenses captured my every expression, but I felt distant, like I was watching myself from underwater. In that moment, covering up bodies with concrete seemed more than just a method of disposal. It was a statement, an erasure, a proclamation that whoever these victims were didn't belong to this world. Back in the barn, I watched my team work. Gloves, trowels, digital cameras. Each tool revealed fragments, a torn blouse sleeve, a single earring, a ledger tucked in the burlap with faint numbers scrawled across it. The state crime lab notified us that the body's DNA profile matched a woman reported missing 2 weeks prior, Mary Collins, age 34, runaway from Jefferson County. She'd last been seen hitchhiking near Jackson Ridge. Another co-worker at the sawmill reported her friend's sudden disappearance. Mary was young, brimming with life, and now she lay under a slab only nights old. I knelt beside the slab, pressed my fingertips against the rough edge where the pore line still held traces of marbling cement. My heart pounded, and I pressed my other hand over my mouth to hold back a groan. The state investigator, a broad-shouldered man named Agent Ramirez, approached, clipboard in hand. "Found any prints on the slab?" he asked. I shook my head. "Too fresh, slick. No distinguishing marks except that handprint," I said. He narrowed his eyes. "Someone wanted us to find this fast." I nodded. "Like the tip came from someone wanting to help, or got cold feet." He glanced around the barn's rafters. "Check for surveillance. Whoever did this knows the patterns. They knew we'd be back here." I felt a fresh wave of exhaustion. "We'll check every house on Chieftain Road, neighbors, surveillance, phone records." He tapped a finger on his chin. "Also, doorbell cams from nearby homes. Any glow from a tablet or phone when they poured. Might give us a timestamp." I stepped back, letting him direct the scene. My eyes focused on the barn's broken door. I had to sift through the suspect pool. Anyone with knowledge of past slabs might think they could dispose of another body, similarly, without detection. I felt the weight of that possibility settle over me, like a blanket soaked in lead. I strode back toward the station once the slab was loaded onto a gurney, shoulders slumping under the weight of dread. Each step down that gravel drive reminded me that the county's darkness had only grown. Concrete no longer hid only old secrets. It now threatened those still alive. At the station, I found Deputy Ellis hunched over the evidence board. His face looked haunted, eyes reddened, a stare fixed on the chart of known victims. The new victim's name, Mary Collins, dangled at the bottom, waiting to be linked. I cleared my throat. He looked up, startled. "I saw the lab results," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." I waved him off. "It's not your fault." He rose, hands fidgeting. "Here," he said, handing me a printout. I went through Grandpa Egan's old files, ledgers, receipts, stuff Emma gave me. "Look at this entry." I unfolded the paper. It showed a payment to a local concrete company dated 2 weeks ago, the company that serviced barns around Maple Grove. The phone number listed wasn't in the normal ledger. Underneath, a scribble read, 3 slabs, rush job. I felt my pulse spike. 3 slabs, I repeated. "But we found only one here." He nodded. "And the payment method, cash, no invoice, put under Batson's feed store account." I stared at him. "Batson's? The feed store on County Road 18. He swallowed. "If someone used that account, they got access to feed deliveries, gravel, anything. It's like a front." My jaw clenched. "Check sales records. Any large orders for cement or gravel around the times Mary disappeared." Ellis nodded and turned back to the board, tapping pins into a county map. I leaned against my desk, eyes closing. The hum of the station's fluorescent lights felt magnified. The weight of that barn's chill seeped into me. I thought of Mary, alive 2 weeks ago, smiling in a photo her sister posted. Now, just another slab waiting to be identified. I fingered the latest dispatch log. Reports of a stolen truck used to haul something heavy, last seen near Cedar Creek, and rainstorms were forecast later tonight, enough to wash away fresh tracks. Whoever was handling this was covering their trail fast. I picked up the radio. "Dispatch, notify all units. Suspicious vehicle tied to potential homicide. Report info to the station immediately." I clicked off the mic and stared at the blank wall across from me. My mind conjured images of that garage, where unknown hands poured wet concrete over living flesh. The thought made my skin crawl. I grabbed my notebook and scribbled a new heading. Quick hit slab disposal. Beneath it, I listed rumors. Farmers who reported strange deliveries late at night. Strangers asking to use back roads. Local feed orders for more cement than usual. A pattern emerged. Mercury's feed store, Holt's Grain, the Bat Colony Orchard, places where gravel and feed mixed with back road business. Each pin I placed on the map felt like a bruise. Just after 6 that evening, the phone rang with lab confirmation. Mary Collins' time of death matched exactly 28 hours ago, shortly after her disappearance. Agent Ramirez peered over the report. "No new prints on the slab," he said. "Toxicology shows mild sedation, but no severe drugs. Something over the counter, perhaps. Cause of death? Blunt trauma to the head, consistent with being knocked out." I nodded. "She likely never woke up." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "We need to find who ordered those sips of cement. Whoever's disposing bodies like trash." I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to any quiet place in my mind. Then I remembered. Mercer Barn, Egan's photos, Emma's wristwatch flicker as she handed me the USB. More names came back to me, people Egan had considered but passed by for some reason. Someone had to know those names too. I summoned Ellis. "Gather Emma. I want her here at 1900 hours. We need to go through those photos again. Focus on locations, timestamps, anything that lines up with Mary's last known movements." Ellis nodded, rushing off. At 7 p.m., Emma walked into my office, pale, tired, clutching a battered duffel bag. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat, eyes downcast. "Thanks for coming," I said. "We've got new evidence that points to Mercer Barn being just one possible site. We need you to walk me through every photo you have, especially the ones you didn't show me." Yet she nodded, unzipped the bag, and pulled out a small stack of envelopes. I spread them on my desk under the harsh glow of a single lamp. She drew in a shaky breath and spoke. "These were taken around late 2003 into early 2004, she began. He'd scout a site, take a few shots with his old Kodak. He said it helped him remember roads, distances. He'd pore over them to decide where to strike next. He kept a habit of cutting down dirt at night and taking pictures under a flashlight. He liked how the edges of shadows hid details." She handed me a time-stamped photo of a windmill atop a hill near Cedar Creek. "This one, see the gravel road leading up? My cousin told me they found her car abandoned there in January 2004, she said, voice trembling. I studied the shadows, the crooked trees lining that road, just enough detail to give away its identity. I nodded. So he was scouting sites over Cedar Creek, then again at Mercer Barn, then finally Mary's Orchard. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. He said if he picked a spot with minimal foot traffic, he'd be safe. But with the storm forecast, he got nervous and moved faster this time. I flipped through more photos. Abandoned equipment sheds, rusted downspouts, broken windmills. Each image a puzzle piece. "Any with license plates, signage, or distinctive landmarks?" I asked. She pointed to a signpost in one photo bearing a half-rusted sign reading North Pine Road. "He sent this to me on a floppy disk," she said. "He was proud of that spot. Out of the way, far from anyone's view." I marked North Pine Road on the map. Another photo, taken at dawn, showed a lone telephone pole with a small transformer, distinctive enough that a power company registry could trace it. I made a note. Emma wiped her eyes. I didn't know how fresh he was planning these. I thought it was all over. After he died, I thought the hunts stopped. I clenched my jaw. Egan's dead, but someone took over, someone who learned from his methods. I could almost hear Egan's smug voice in my head. Concrete never lies. It hides what needs hiding. But grief cut through me. People still vanished, and their bodies turned to stone. I swallowed hard. "Emma, there's another thing. We found out Mary Collins was sedated, something mild. She wouldn't have expected anything, wouldn't have resisted." She shook her head, sobbing silently. "He used Benadryl on me once," she whispered. "Said it helped them stay calm before he poured. I remember the way he smiled when he said it." She pressed a hand to her mouth, choking back tears. I shut my eyes, letting that sentence echo. My skin crawled. I thought about my own nieces and nephews, about the innocence stolen by a sedative. "Emma, we're going to connect these sites. Start with Cedar Creek, Mercer, North Pine Road, and the Orchard. Any site he scouted, we'll check for fresh soil disturbances, concrete residues, or ground compaction indicating a slab." She nodded, sniffling. "Anything you need, I'll help." I gave her a firm nod. "We'll begin first light tomorrow. But tonight, if you come across any other discs or photos you forgot, get them to me ASAP." She rose and left, shoulders hunched. I felt the room empty, cold. I stared at the envelopes, scattered like fallen leaves. Each one felt like a tombstone in my mind. I grabbed my coat and flashlight. No rest until I checked those sites. Out in the parking lot, dew glistened on the cruiser's roof. The radio crackled with idle chatter, routine calls, nothing urgent. I climbed in and stared ahead at the curve in the road leading toward Cedar Creek. My mouth felt dry, throat thick. I activated the GPS coordinates for Cedar Creek's crossing and drove down the dark, empty highway. The headlights carved a path, illuminating shadows of skeletal trees that stretched like grasping hands into the night. As I approached the old crossing, radio silent except for night insects droning through the speaker, I saw a solitary figure standing under a broken street lamp. An impossible sight. It was Elaine Morgan's outline, thin, frail, still clad in the prison-issued jumpsuit she'd worn when I transported her. She raised a gloved hand, motioning me closer. My pulse slammed. "Sheriff," she said, voice hollow. "You shouldn't be here." I kept my hand on the door's frame, watching her lean against the rusted guardrail. "Elaine, you're not allowed out of prison." Her eyes flicked to the rooftop, no guards in sight. She shrugged. "I know, but I couldn't sleep. I keep seeing her face. Mary's face, like she's begging me. I saw on the news you closed the orchard site, but look at this." She held out a small Polaroid, edges curling. I took it, heart hammering. It showed Mary Collins mid-stride on Highway 52, shot moments before she disappeared. The timestamp read, March 1st, 1918, 11:04 p.m. The same night the first slab was found in the quarry. My hands shook. "Where did you get this?" She shook her head. "I found it in Egan's hidden desk, inside an old jacket pocket. I didn't know what it was until I saw you at the scene. I tried to bring it forward, but they wouldn't let me. Said I was too unreliable." I stared at the photo. Behind Mary I saw a second figure, someone trudging behind her, a bulge under their coat. A silhouette familiar yet impossible. My gut dropped. "Sheriff, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to get hurt, but they said if I spilled more, they'd bury me in a slab too." She turned away, voice cracking. I felt a jagged fear spike through me. They still existed. Not one killer, but a network. Someone taking Egan's blueprint and using it to hide more. The county's quiet nights were a lull before more horrors. Elaine stepped back into shadows. "Take care of Mary," she murmured, "and the others." She vanished into the night. The sudden silence pressed against me as I stood alone on that bridge. My flashlight beam wavered on empty water swirling below. I felt each breath rasp in my chest. The radio clicked. "Report, unidentified car traveling southbound, plate partially obscured, bearing suspicious cargo." I drew my pistol, recognizing the shape of a long toolbox strapped to the roof. Perfect for carrying wet concrete. My fingers trembled as I whispered, "Dispatch, intercept that vehicle." The night closed in around me as I raced down the back roads toward Highway 52. Every bump in the gravel was a heartbeat. As I pulled onto the highway, headlights illuminated a dark sedan veering off onto County Road 19, the direction of Cedar Creek's underpass. My siren flared to life. The sedan sped up, tires skidding into gravel. I chased, adrenaline pulsing like wildfire. The underpass loomed ahead, where the creek carved a silent path beneath a rusted trestle. The sedan screeched to a halt under the bridge's girder, the driver's door slamming open. A silhouette slipped out, hoisting something heavy from the trunk. I skidded to a stop, engine idling, flashlight and weapon ready. "Freeze," I barked. The figure paused. Stout build, shoulders hunched, face hidden under a baseball cap. Under the bridge, a fresh patch of ground lay disturbed, leafless branches overhead rattling. The figure hefted a large bucket, wet concrete sloshing inside. My pulse hammered so loudly I felt it in my wrists. I took a step forward, and the figure dropped the bucket. Concrete splattering, then bolted into darkness toward a narrow path along the creek bank. I raced after them, boots sloshing through mud. The figure zigzagged between trees, sprinting like a man possessed. Ahead, moonlight flashed off a slab already set into a shallow pit, freshly poured, still smooth and glistening. Beneath it, a burlap bundle shifted slightly, as if something moved inside. I lunged forward, kicking at the slab's edge. It cracked under impact, a dull boom that echoed off the water. My flashlight beam found a woman's face, eyes wide, frantic, mouth forming a silent scream. I ripped off the slab and exposed her head, dark hair plastered to her cheeks, bruised face already turning pallid. I pressed my fingers to her neck, no pulse. My throat tightened. I shut my eyes for a second, forcing myself to breathe. This was Mary's copy, a copy of everyone who'd vanished. Another slab. It had all happened so fast and I'd been too late. I turned to chase the driver's silhouette again, but he had vanished into the woods. There was only the wet, glinting surface of the fresh slab and the woman's body entombed in burlap. I reached into my pocket for the disposable phone. Too late. The battery died. No signal, no call, no clue. I felt a cry catch in my throat, but no sound came. The radio crackled alive. Deputy Conway's voice calling backup for a fleeing suspect. The floodlights on the police cruisers carved long shadows over the creek. But as they rounded the bend, they found nothing. Just empty mud, that fresh slab, and the silenced body that fit no identity yet. I knelt beside the slab, flashlight beam wild on the cracked concrete. My knees trembled. I felt the county's darkness press against me, suffocating. The night became a suffocating cocoon, broken only by my ragged breath and the distant rumble of cruiser engines. I stared at that slab, fresh and undeveloped, and realized this was no longer about Egan's victims. This was a new chapter, someone teaching others how to bury life under stone. Someone who believed that concrete could hide truth forever. I reached out and touched the slab's slick surface one last time. My reflection in the wet concrete looked hollow, haunted. Just another witness to a horror that refused to stay buried. And in that moment I knew the darkness in Sparrow County had no end. Concrete might harden and silence a body, but it couldn't quench the memory, the fear, the terrible possibility of what lay beneath. And tonight, as the creek's dark waters swirled under the moonlit bridge, I felt the county hold its breath, waiting for the next slab to surface. The sunrise found me slumped in my cruiser on Highway 52, windows steamed by my breath. Exhaustion clawed at my bones, but I forced myself to move. The world around me, fields turning pale gold in early light, felt grotesquely serene. I shook my head to clear the fog of sleepless nights. I had to follow through on the Mercer barn tip and track that fleeing suspect. The radio crackled with debris of calls, an urgent plea for K-9 support, a county bottleneck because of the road closure at the underpass. I turned on the ignition, muscles stiff as iron. A fresh report came in. Surveillance video from the feed store on County Road 18 had captured a dark sedan leaving at 11:30 p.m. License plate partially obscured, heading south toward Holt's Grain. I recalled the scribbled ledger entry. 3 slabs, rush job. Someone ordered 3 slabs and we'd only found 2. Now Mary and the Mercer barn victim. 1 remained out there, likely already sealed in concrete, waiting to be found, or maybe never discovered if snow or rain washed away the signs. I drove east toward the Holt's Grain facility, passing clusters of feed silos like monoliths guarding secrets. The yard's lights flickered on as I pulled in, distant orange bulbs making grain dust dance in the chill air. Depot workers eyed me warily as I approached, hands shoved in coat pockets. I flashed my badge and introduced myself. Sheriff Drew Callahan, I need your records. Any delivery logs of concrete or gravel over the last month." The foreman, a broad man with a streak of gray in his beard, nodded. We ran a few large orders for someone calling himself J. Harris. Paid in cash, no invoice. Picked up loads 3 times late at night. He handed me a logbook, entries for March 1st, 10th, and 15th. Times around 10:45 p.m. each night. I circled those dates, murmuring, "Harris? Doesn't ring a bell." I slipped out and dialed dispatch. "Pull any listing for J. Harris in county records, addresses, phone numbers, any record." The dispatcher's voice was flat with sleep. "On it, Sheriff." I pocketed the logbook and stepped into the cold night. A pale moon hovered above the silos like a silent sentinel. The wind carried a bite of frost. I started toward the cruiser, mind racing over possibilities. Back at the station, I pored over the logbook in my office, the overhead lamp buzzing. Bingo. A handwritten address next to one entry. J. Harris, Maplewood Estates, Unit 24. I grabbed my keys and headed out again. Radio silent now except for the crackle of static. Maplewood Estates was a trailer park on the outskirts of Hollowbrook. Rows of faded mobile homes with rusted porches and sagging steps. I parked at the entrance and made my way through the gravel lanes, every bite of wind feeling like fingernails scraping bone. I located Unit 24, a single wide trailer with peeling vinyl siding, sagging awning, and a flickering porch light. The door hung slightly ajar. I raised my flashlight and pistol. "Sheriff's Department, anyone inside?" My voice echoed. No answer. Gravel crunched behind me as I approached. I kicked the door open and cleared the threshold. Inside, the trailer was nearly empty. Sheets on a twin bed, a hollowed-out coffee table, a small TV screen dark. On the floor lay a pair of muddy boots identical to those in Egan's photos. Tall brown leather with frayed laces. My breath caught. I sheathed my pistol and knelt to inspect them. Underneath, dust still clung damply. Someone had worn them recently. On a makeshift counter against the wall sat a stack of envelopes, my heart thudding like gospel drums. I rifled through them, finding photographs. Grainy shots of potential slab sites, the Mercer Barn, the Orchard, the Water Tower lot, Cedar Creek Crossing, North Pine Road. Then I found a small scrap of map, similar to what Elaine had given me years ago but updated. Additional X's circled near Maplewood Estates and back toward Mercer. And then I saw a newer envelope, marked, "Do not open until March 20th. My fingers trembled as I slid it open, revealing a Polaroid strip taped to a page. The photos showed a slab site still under tarp, tight, unfinished. Date stamp 032019, just hours before my call to the underpass. I looked up, sweat prickling my brow. This was fresh planning. Someone was ahead of me, leaving clues as if to taunt. I yanked the phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the keys, but I hesitated. The suspect could be hiding inside. I clicked to secure backup. Deputy Conway, Deputy Ellis, State K-9 Unit. Dispatch, priority call, possible homicide site lead, suspect at Maplewood Estates. I stayed low, checking each room. A bathroom, empty kitchen, a back bedroom with a small desk. On the desk, a crudely drawn map mirrored the one I held. Another X at Mercer, another near the Orchard, and a final X drawn on the county jail. My skin crawled. I snapped photos with my flashlight, documenting it all. Suddenly, a door slammed. Outside, gravel crunched on the porch. I raised my weapon, every muscle coiled. Then a figure stumbled across the deck. Barefoot, shirt torn, pants caked in mud. It was a teenage girl, dirt-smudged face pale as death. She flinched when she saw me. "Sheriff," she stammered. He sent me. He said to deliver the photos." She held trembling Polaroids showing a trailer hidden behind brush, just off Maplewood Estates near a shallow pond. In one image, a man's silhouette stood at the trailer's open door. I motioned her inside, keeping my gun trained on the doorway. "What's your name?" I asked. She swallowed. Lisa Monroe." She wiped tears from her eyes. "He told me you'd come. He said to tell you he's already set the last slab." She swallowed again. "He said it's under the old ice house near Redding's farm." My mind reeled. Redding's farm was 15 miles north. Another remote barn sitting along a dirt road. If Lisa was right, I had only hours to find that slab before it cured. I watched her face. Sunken cheeks, haunted eyes. "You're safe now," I said gently. "I'm going to get backup. Don't move." I holstered my pistol and backed out, pulling the door shut. Deck boards creaked behind me as I sprinted to the cruiser, slammed the driver's door, and barked into the radio. "Conway, Ellis, State K9. Meet me at Redding's farm now. Witness Lisa Monroe on board. Possible slab under ice house. Route is County Road 33. I sped off, tires churning gravel. Moonlight flickered through skeletal tree lines. My heartbeat pounded so fiercely I thought I might hear it over the engine. The radio responded, "Copy that, Sheriff." ETA 10 minutes. The distance to Redding's farm felt like a million miles. Each bump in the road made me flinch as I thought of the body entombed in wet concrete. I wiped sweat from my brow even though the night was cold. When I pulled up at Redding's farm, Conway and Ellis's cruisers stood halogen-lit under the barn's eaves. The K9 unit idled nearby, dogs in the back, noses twitching. I climbed out, Lisa Monroe bundled in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself. I jumped onto the porch of the ice house, a squat brick building with a low roof and metal door. I heard voices, Conway and Ellis talking to Lisa in hushed tones. I crept around to the side, where muddy shoe prints marked the path to a shallow depression in the ground. A thin canvas tarp lay half-rolled back. I knelt and brushed the tarp aside. Beneath it, a fresh mound of earth beckoned. No slab crust yet, just dark, wet dirt. I laid my palm on the ground, feeling it vibrate with life. Then I saw movement, a faint, ragged breath from below. I felt bile send shards of ice through my chest. Without hesitation, I grabbed a shovel from the tech's tool stash and began digging, fistfuls of muddy earth giving way under the blade. Conway knelt beside me, helping, as we unearthed a square wooden form, a crude mold holding wet concrete. I kicked at the boards. The form broke, spilling wet gray mixture onto the ground. Beneath, a body slumped in a pool of mortar, barely conscious, head lolling to the side. The man's eyes opened, pupils wide, confusion and fear blazing. He tried to push himself free, arms pinned under his torso. Ellis shouted, "Hold on, we've got you." I leaned down and peeled away the burlap coating the slab's bottom, revealing the man's wrists bound with duct tape, eyes darting as he noticed us, mouth forming a silent plea. I reached for my radio. "Medic, urgent. Might have a pulse. Get here now." I pressed my flashlight into his face, catching the glint in his eyes. The fellow was gaunt, face sunken, cheeks hollow, beard stubbly. He wore a dirty hooded sweatshirt and jeans. As he felt the cool night air on his skin, terror washed over him. He whimpered, unable to speak, blinking against the light. I took in the form, half filled with concrete, just enough to keep him immobilized. I felt anger surge. Conway and Ellis pried the remainder of the mold away while I roused him. "You're safe now. You're in Hollowbrook County. Hold on, medic's coming." He tried to nod, lips quivering. Blood trickled from his scalp, likely from head trauma inflicted before he was placed here. I felt bile rise again, but I swallowed it down, focusing on the man fighting for life beneath wet concrete. Minutes later, blue and red lights pulsed against the barn's siding. Paramedics burst onto the scene, taking over as the K9 unit circled nearby. I backed away, kneeling in the mud beside the excavation hole. Lisa Monroe's face hovered in my mind. She'd delivered the clue that saved this man's life. I rose, scanning the ice house's broken windows for any sign of the suspect. No one. I radioed dispatch for a full perimeter check. This killer had fled, but we now had a witness, the man trapped in concrete. As the medics worked, I knelt by the edge of the hole, flashlight illuminating the soaked earth. The wet concrete near the edge had partially cured, stinging at my bare hands. I wiped my palm across the damp ground, gritty, cold. The air smelled like rot and wet clay. The man's labored breathing echoed around me. I wondered how many more had been left out here under moonlit nights, waiting for discovery. I felt the darkness gnawing at me, an insatiable hunger for someone to stop the madness. I returned to the barn's open doorway and peered inside. The ice house loomed like a stone sentinel. Part of me expected to see Egan's face, or some dark mirror of him, someone who learned from a madman's playbook. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. I vowed I would not let another slab claim an innocent life. I pulled my radio to my lips. "Dispatch, set all units to code 3 for the next 45 minutes. Search the forested areas east of here. Subject took off on foot." Despite the cold, sweat beaded on my brow. My shoulders drooped beneath fatigue and guilt. The paramedics wheeled the man away on a stretcher, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt a pain so deep it threatened to shatter something inside me. After they loaded him onto the ambulance, I knelt in the mud once more, placing a trembling hand on where his head had rested. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." I rose, back lit by emergency strobes. I noticed fresh footprints leading from the ice house's side door to the barn's rear. Someone had operated quickly, leaving minimal trace. I trailed them into the blackness, flashlight beam cutting a path. Branches scratched my arms and the air felt thick, like the darkness itself pressed against my lungs. After 50 yards, the footprints disappeared in a marshy patch where the ground was too soft to leave clear impressions. Beyond lay a faint break in the trees where a horse trail led to Cedar Creek Road. I paused, hand on my flashlight. My chest tightened as I thought. The killer was now on foot, heading east, likely toward County Road 18 and Mercury's feed store. The region was crisscrossed with back roads and hidden gravel pits, perfect for an escape. I radioed in the coordinates, urging deputies to set up roadblocks. My thoughts tumbled. 19 known victims. 1 rescued in the nick of time, 1 suspect still loose. And beyond all that, a network, someone skilled, someone learning, evolving. Concrete was no longer just a tool, it was a symbol of silence and power. The killer used it to erase people, bury them where they'd never be found. And now that killer had nearly succeeded in silencing another human. Only the courage of a frightened teenager had saved a life. As I climbed back into my cruiser, I stared at the ice house, its form looming like a tomb. I felt a simmering rage, tempered by exhaustion and dread. I turned the ignition and flicked on the radar unit. A blip indicating movement eastbound on Cedar Creek Road. That had to be him. I slammed the cruiser into gear, headlights carving through the night and tore down the road in pursuit. Red and blue reflections strobing across fields of dormant stalks. Every mile, the tension built, a knot tightening in my gut. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, as the sounds of pursuit echoed. Sirens in the distance, radio chatter, tires screeching. I felt the county's breath hold tight, waiting for resolution. Yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew. The darkness in Sparrow County had grown too clever, too determined. Concrete might cover the evidence, but it couldn't smother the truth forever. And as I raced into that cold, silent night, I pledged to follow the truth wherever it led, no matter how deep or how dark. The pursuit led me along crooked county roads under a moonless sky so dark it felt like driving through an endless void. Dispatch relayed updates. The suspect's dark sedan had its tail light shot out and had careened off into a field near Cedar Creek Road. Deputies fanned out on foot, flashlights flickering like lost fireflies among the corn stubble. My cruiser roared past, tires kicking up gravel, headlight beams carving arcs of light through the fog that clung to the fields like a shroud. I cut through a utility lane between two corn paddocks, the tall stalks brushing my windows as if trying to warn me away. My radio buzzed. Subject on foot near the old Mercer livestock chute. My heart hammered. That chute, an iron framework rusted to red, stood ghost-like against the horizon. I swerved onto the field access road and pulled up beside Conway, who had his shotgun leveled at the chute's base, crouched behind his cruiser. "There?" I hissed, pointing. He nodded. I turned on my flashlight and we crept forward, every sense straining. An unearthly silence pressed upon us. No crickets, no wind, nothing but the dull hum of our breath and the faint rustle of residual corn stalks. My boots sank slightly as I approached the chute. Moonlight found a smear of fresh concrete footprints heading into the darkness. "He dragged something," I whispered. I followed the prints a few feet until a burlap sack lay torn, straps undone, pills scattered, tiny white tablets stained with dirt. I recognized them. Diphenhydramine. The same mild sedative Egan used. I pressed my flashlight into the chute's shadow. Nothing. Every crevice felt like a trap. Then a muffled moan rose from behind stacked hay bales. I signaled Conway and we moved together, weapons raised. We found him crumpled beneath the iron bars. A man so thin his ribs pressed like piano keys into skin. A gash across his forehead oozed dark red. He tried to crawl away, arms shaking. I knelt beside him, flashlight in hand. His breaths were ragged, rasping. "Sheriff," he whispered, eyes wild, I just wanted to help my sister find out what happened to her friend." I recognized the heartbreak, the same fear I'd seen in Lisa Monroe and Emma Egan. "Stay with me," I said, scanning for any immediate threat. "Deputy, get EMTs here now. This man needs a hospital." Conway nodded, calling it in. The man's voice slurred as he tried to speak. I thought if I agreed to help, I could find her before he did it." I felt bile rise again. "Who did you help?" He shook his head, tears streaming. He called himself Harris, told me he'd lost his sister too, said we could bury her together here. He coughed. Then I saw the slab, knew it was wrong. I tried to stop, but he knocked me cold. He winced. Took me here. I woke up, halfway in, thought I was gonna die. My chest convulsed. I closed my eyes, then opened them on a world that, like him, gave no mercy. "Tell me everything you remember," I urged, voice gentle but firm. He lifted a trembling hand to point beyond the chute, toward a single-lane dirt track leading north. He had a cabin up there. He shivered. Said if we went there, we could get more supplies. I nodded. Go on. He closed his eyes, focusing. It's abandoned now. Looks like a hunting cabin, fields overgrown. Built on old farmland. Something about it made him feel safe from prying eyes. He said if the slab wasn't perfect, the water would ruin it. He rigged up those tents, big white canvas to block rain. I felt goosebumps stand up even in that close heat. Anything else? I asked. He nodded, eyes fluttering. That cabin, it's by Birch Hollow, off Shard Road. He gasped, pain lacing his voice. He had lye and lime in there. I saw buckets of it stacked, with tarps to keep them dry. He said he'd need more. I swallowed hard. Lime and lye, chemicals used to dissolve evidence. He was planning not just to kill, but to erase bodies. If he succeeded, no one would ever find them. I checked my watch, 02:30 hours. The air felt too thin to breathe. You did good, I said quietly. Hold on. He nodded, eyes slipping shut, coughing weakly. Conway knelt beside me, supporting the man's head. I radioed dispatch. Possible cabin site at Birch Hollow off Shard Road. Send units now. K-9 teams, troopers, everyone. The radio buzzed. Copy that, Sheriff. I stood, thanking Conway. The man needed immediate medical attention at the hospital. I listened as the helicopters were scrambled for overhead support. I felt the gravity of the moment. This was the final thread unraveling an entire tapestry of horror. I edged away from the chute, pulled my coat tighter, and set off along the moonlit path toward Shard Road. The drive to Birch Hollow felt endless. Gravel turned to dirt, lined by dense forest whose silhouettes flickered like spirits beneath the night. I kept the cruiser's headlights dim to avoid spooking any animals, or the killer. My radio crackled with updates, troopers en route, K-9 units closing in, a state forensics bus rolling down Highway 52. I navigated a series of switchbacks until I reached a fork, a worn sign reading Birch Hollow, 2 miles. I followed the narrow lane, tires crunching over loose gravel, branches scraping the roof. Suddenly, up ahead, my beam caught a faint glow. A soft yellow light filtering through the trees. A solitary cabin stood clearing edge. Wooden siding grayed with age, a tin roof rimmed with mildew. The smoke curled from a tiny chimney, a clear sign of occupancy. I recognized the cabin immediately from the man's description. Shacks leaning to one side, windows boarded over, and a large canvas tarp stretching from roof eaves to the front posts, shielding the porch. The tarp flapped gently, stirring fear in my gut. I cut the cruiser's engine and killed the headlights, leaving only the faint glow from the cabin's interior light. I stepped out and signaled Deputy Ellis, who was flanking me on foot. I kept my flashlight low, using it only to trace the ground. He nodded, leveling his rifle. We crept forward until the clearing widened enough to fully reveal the cabin's face. Under the tarp lay buckets stacked, gelled wet lye and lime covered with thin plastic, burlap sacks full of cement. A makeshift mixing area stood to one side, a cement mixer half full of gray slurry, its motor silent. A long wooden plank led from the mixer to the front, ending at a patch of ground disturbed a few inches, fresh marks of human effort. I followed them to a small pit under the porch, already caked with gray sludge, edges still soft. I swallowed and took a step back. Ramirez, I whispered into the radio, using the state agent's name. We have a cook site ready to move in on 3, possible victim in that pit or nearby. I pressed the mic off and glanced at Ellis. On 3, I said. He nodded, sweeping his flashlight across windows. We started forward, boots on loose gravel. The cabin's door stood ajar. the interior light casting shadows that danced like restless ghosts. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and kicked the door open. Inside, the smell hit me first. A rancid blend of damp wood, bleach, and something foul, human waste or worse. Buckets of chemicals lined one wall, large jugs labeled sodium hydroxide, caustic lime. On a battered wooden table lay tools, hammers, chisels, a saw dusted in cement residue. Under another tarp, I saw a canvas sheet soiled with mud. A scrawled message in dried blood spiked my heart. Erase the pain. I stepped closer, scanning every inch while Ellis covered my back. My boots clicked on the hardwood floor, boards warped, splintered with age. A low moan came from the doorway to the back room. Ellis swept his beam there. Barely visible under a thick layer of dust lay another concrete slab cradled in a wooden mold, half complete. I knelt beside it, carefully brushing away the top dust. The surface was too fresh to show prints, but I saw gummy edges. Wet cement beneath that hadn't fully set. I crouched and peered under the slab's edge. Beneath lay a young man, head shrouded in a hood, body curled in fetal position. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, still alive, but barely. "Medic," I barked into the radio. "We have a live male, approximate age late 20s, sedated. Trench for slab almost filled. Subject unknown, only one slab here." I reached down and gently slid my hand next to his wrist, no pulse. I felt sick. I pressed my earpiece. "Open the mold. We need to get him out now." Ellis and I pried at the discarded wood supports while Ramirez's team formed a human chain, carrying the man out onto a blanket. Paramedics rushed him to the ambulance idling nearby, engines rumbling. I watched as they lifted him, stretcher deep, limp, indistinct under the swirling lights. I turned back to the deserted cabin. The realism of the scene grounded me. No ghosts, no spells, just a man nearly smothered by hate and planning. The sight of that half-finished slab drove a spike into my chest. This killer was methodical, specialized, almost surgical in his care. I realized, with every rising pulse of the Ambu helos, that if we'd arrived mere minutes later, I'd have been lifting a corpse the way we had Mary and the Mercer barn victim. Now, we had him alive. But who was he? Another stranger, bound by fear or forced compliance. I snapped photos for the forensics team, documenting the mixer, the buckets, the half-poured slab, the skeletal remains of tools on the table. Each object told me a fragment. This was a secondary site. A copy of Egan's storm cellar, but updated, expanded, far more efficient. I stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter as cold wind swept over the clearing. The growing dawn painted pale blue across the sky. I looked at the pit under the porch. Black earth shimmered with wet cement flecks. I felt my throat constrict. It had been carved out just hours ago. I turned north, toward Cedar Creek Road, where deputies were blocking the highway. The suspect must have fled back that way, perhaps aiming to circle around or reach another site on the updated map. I called Conway over. "Check behind the barn, tree line. He might be hiding if he saw me arrive." He nodded, disappearing into the underbrush. I watched as he slipped between trees, silent. I turned to the forensics lead, Agent Ramirez. "We need to search the immediate perimeter, within a quarter-mile radius. There could be evidence in the woods, tire tracks, footprints." He barked orders into his radio. "Field teams sweep north and west. K9 units pick up trace scents." I remained by the doorway, hand on my holster, scanning the tree line. I spotted a set of footprints leading from the cabin side door to the forest, a likely escape route. I memorized their direction. My radio crackled. Conway's voice. "Sheriff, I found tire tracks, fresh, heading into the trees. K9 is on the scent." I nodded. The chase wasn't over. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed dispatch. Set up closure on Cedar Creek Road. We have a suspect headed east toward the river crossing. Send spike strips to the bridge entrance. The dispatcher replied, "Copy that. Roadblock in place in 5 minutes." I clicked off and tucked the phone away. Overhead, dawn's first light broke through the treetops, revealing the forest's mire. Muddy, tangled, not friendly terrain. I stepped down from the porch and headed toward the tracks. My flashlight remained in hand, cutting arcs through the gloom. Each step felt deliberate, cautious, like walking into a trap. I noticed scratch marks on a tree. Fresh bark peeled away as though someone had used it to steady themselves. My pulse thundered. The forest became a maze of bare branches reaching like arms into my path. I could almost see shapes moving just beyond the beam, shadows shaped by fear. I followed the footprints to a shallow creek feeding into Cedar Creek. The ground was waterlogged, but I pushed through, water soaking my boots. The scent of wet earth filled my nostrils, an intoxicating mix of mud and decay. The tracks ended at a broken-down pontoon, half sunken in the water, trailer long gone. I knew the suspect must have ditched the boat and continued on foot. I called Ellis on the radio. "Possible river crossing here. Check opposite shore." He replied, "On it." I stood at the water's edge, watching ripples spread across the surface. Somewhere upstream, the creek's current was swift, and I knew crossing on foot would be treacherous. But desperation drives people. I glanced toward the distant silhouette of the Hospital Hill Ridge, where a paved road ran to the county line. If the suspect reached there, he'd vanish beyond our jurisdiction. I couldn't let that happen. I took out my torch and set it to strobe, hoping if anyone lurked downstream they'd spot it. Then I dialed Mode 2 on my radio. "Conway, meet me at the crossing." "We need to flank him," he responded. "Be there in 2 minutes, Sheriff." I turned back to the water, wondering how many victims had ended up here, never found. Their bodies carried downstream or hidden in muck. The thought made my stomach churn. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled, pistol raised. Fog lifted slightly, and I glimpsed a figure emerging, wet, hunched, eyes wild, hands stained with mud and cement residue. It was the suspect, a lanky man in his mid-30s, jaw clenched, breathing ragged. He looked at me, disbelief in his eyes. I didn't hesitate. "Drop the knife," I yelled, waving my pistol. He froze, then threw the small blade he held into the creek. "Please," he croaked. "I didn't mean to kill anyone. I was scared." He said if I didn't help, I'd be next. He collapsed to his knees, trembling. I holstered my weapon and offered him a gloved hand. "Stay where you are," I said. Conway arrived, gun drawn but lowered as he saw the suspect kneeling. "Sheriff?" he said quietly. I nodded. "Stand him up, cuff him." Conway did so, his hand steady on the man's wrist as he turned and lifted him to his feet. The suspect's eyes flicked back to the creek, despair in his gaze. "I just wanted to get out," he muttered, "out of that darkness." I watched him, thinking of the men and women whose lives he almost erased. "You helped cover up the deaths of 19 people," I said softly. "But you didn't finish one. That might save you." Deputies arrived and formed a line behind us. The suspect, handcuffed and shaking, limped toward the cruisers. I watched him board, head bowed, and I realized how close we'd come to another tragedy. The creek's water lapped at the bank, carrying wafer-thin debris, bits of torn burlap, tiny shards of concrete, like reminders that the horror had seeped into every echo of this place. I took a final look at the pontoon half submerged in water, rusting like a rotting tooth. Above, the sky brightened with the promise of sunrise, yet nothing about that new day felt hopeful. As deputies led the suspect away, I knelt at the water's edge, letting the cool current wash over my boots. I thought of the 19 lost souls, some discovered, one rescued, countless more considered dead in the eyes of neighbors and friends. Now, a handful of suspects would face justice, yet the memory of those victims, buried in concrete, lingered like a poison. I stood and brushed mud from my knees. The radio buzzed. "Sheriff, perimeter secure, no sign of other suspects." I nodded to Conway. "Take him in." He guided the suspect to a waiting cruiser. As they drove away, sirens muted by distance, I felt a flicker of relief and a weight that would never lift. I turned to see dawn's light pour across the meadow, illuminating the broken tree line and far-off barns. The county seemed to breathe again as life stirred, birds calling, wind rustling new leaves. But below the surface of that calm, I knew darkness festered still. Somewhere dry slabs of concrete waited for the next unsuspecting traveler. The price of complacency was too high. I reached into my coat for the disposable phone. Dead now, its battery spent. I pressed it gently into my palm, then dropped it into the creek. It skidded away in ripples, disappearing beneath murky water. Water smoothed over it, washing it toward the confluence with Cedar Creek. If someone found it downstream, they'd see nothing but a dead phone, no messages, no confessions. I turned and walked back to my cruiser, each footstep measured and heavy. I climbed in, feeling the leather seat cool against my fatigued body. I placed my hand on the wheel, knuckles white. The morning was bright and full of promise, but also of unanswered questions. 19 victims had a chance at dignity and death. One man had a chance to live, but the county's scars ran too deep to heal in one swoop of sunshine. I started the engine and headed back toward Hollowbrook, headlights picking out distant windmills turning slowly in the breeze. I flicked on the radio, static, then dispatch's voice. "Sheriff, all units clear. Suspect in custody, scene locked down." I exhaled and closed my eyes for a moment, letting out a breath I didn't know I held. As I turned onto Highway 49, I felt the weight of the century-old oak whisper in the wind, its branches swaying like silent sentinels. Under its roots, the first victims might still rest, sealed in integrated fear. This county had a way of hiding horrors in plain sight, where only a tire track, a bruise, a piece of paper could reveal the truth. But now, after 5 relentless nights, I believed we'd finally unearthed most of it. Yet, in the corner of my mind, I felt something stirring, an echo of movement beneath the surface, a faint, rasping breath rolling across the fields like a lost soul. I rolled down the window, letting the breeze carry away fragments of frost and dust. The county sang its morning song, birds, tractors starting for morning chores, distant dogs barking. I drove on, eyes on the road, but I never forgot that deep in those woods, across those fields, someone else had to know. Concrete could hide bodies, but it couldn't silence memory. And in every silent slab there was a heartbeat waiting to be heard. I kept driving east on Highway 49, but my mind drifted back to that old oak, its roots tangled deep beneath the dirt, hiding secrets like veins of ice under the skin of the earth. The dawn light cut slanted shadows across the road. Every dark patch between the fields felt like an open wound waiting to be discovered. My radio lay silent in the cradle, but the station's chatter was there in my head. Reports of the rescued victim's condition, debriefs about the cabin site, new leads from Lisa Monroe and Emma Egan. Those names looped through my thoughts like a scratched record. As miles ticked by, I passed Hollowbrook's outskirts. Farmhouses beginning to stir, a milk truck rumbling toward the coop, a lone jogger in neon gear beside the old mill pond. From a distance, it looked normal, peaceful and quiet in the early light, but I knew better. Beneath that veneer, bodies lay, or once lay, entombed in concrete, hidden in sheds and barns and fields where no one ever looked too closely. And someone else had picked up that same deadly blueprint. Someone who thought they could learn from Egan's methods, drop another slab, scroll another name into oblivion. I parked outside my house on Maple Street around 0630 hours. The air was cool enough to fog the windshield. I sat for a while, hands on the wheel, just breathing. The distant clatter of a newspaper hitting the porch drifted up from the mailbox corner. I reached over, pressed the latch on the passenger door, and grabbed the day's paper. The headline on the front page read, "New evidence in Hollowbrook concrete case, survivor speaks out." I flipped to the article. Mary Collins had been stabilized at County General. They didn't expect lasting brain damage, but she'd be in the hospital for weeks. Her family issued a statement, thanking the sheriff's office and the anonymous teenagers who called it in. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Getting her out last night had been a near miss. 10 more minutes, and she would have been another slab, just like Henry Turner, like Louis Whitaker. I set the paper aside and reached for the coffee mug on the passenger seat, stone cold. I turned the key to crank the heater, but thought better of it. I needed to see the world unfiltered, even if it meant the chill of early morning. I stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching on frost-tipped grass, and walked onto my porch. My front yard, normally nothing but a tidy lawn and a few flower beds, felt heavy. I thought of every family who'd never known their missing loved one had been erased beneath a layer of concrete. I thought of Emma Egan, quarantined in her own guilt, and Lisa Monroe, staring at her shoes like she'd grown 2 sizes younger overnight. I thought of the man we'd pulled from Mercer Barn, clutching life by a thread. I felt a tingling at the back of my neck, like someone's gaze was on me, even though I was alone. I surveyed the quiet street. A few windows dark, blinds drawn, others flickering with early morning news shows. Then I saw a car idling at the curb across the street. Its engine, rumbling like a panther primed to pounce. A dark sedan, tinted windows, no plate visible in the dim light. I stiffened, heart accelerating. Could be a neighbor, could be one of the deputies off shift. But something about the way it sat there, unyielding and too still, set my nerves on edge. I stepped closer to the edge of my porch, flashlight ready in my left hand and my phone in my right. The car's windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. No one moved, no headlights, just a breathing black hole on wheels. I inhaled slowly, trying to steady my pulse. I clicked open the phone and tapped the top screen. Dispatch, potential suspicious vehicle parked across from my house. No lights on, tinted windows. Appears unoccupied, but I'd like a check, please. The dispatcher replied immediately. Copy that, Sheriff. We'll send a unit to investigate. ETA 2 minutes. I clicked off, but kept my phone to my ear in case the car moved. My flashlight's beam danced across the sidewalk, illuminating threads of frost and the faint outline of a stray cat darting into a neighbor's shrub. The sun was cresting the horizon now, painting the sky pale pink, but the air felt thick, like storm clouds brewing low. After a minute that felt like 10, I watched a figure emerge from the passenger side of the sedan, shoulders hunched, hat pulled low. He stepped onto my lawn, hands in pockets, edging toward the front door. My heart froze. It was Deputy Ellis. My relief nearly turned to anger. If anyone knew my address, it was him. But then I saw the slump of his shoulders, the glazed look in his eyes. he didn't see me on the porch. He took a few steps up the walkway, leaned against the door frame and pressed something into my screen door, a folded slip of paper. Then he turned and retreated to the sedan as quietly as he'd come. The engine rumbled once as he slid in, then paused. A minute later, the car's taillights flicked on. Then they were gone down the street, swallowed by dawn's glow. I kept my gaze locked on the road as their lights disappeared, then watched the space where Ellis had pressed the note. The front door of my house was solid oak with a narrow mail slot near the bottom. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, thinking, what did he want me to know? What was so urgent he couldn't say it in person? I started toward the door, but my trembling hand hesitated. Then I cracked it open and bent to retrieve the paper. A plain, lined slip, the edges marred by creases. My flashlight revealed the writing, scrawled in Ellis's neat, even print. "Sheriff, it's not over. The final slab is here. Let Under Oak." I watched them bury it at midnight. Don't go alone. I stared at the note, the words twisting my gut. Let Under Oak. He meant that old oak tree outside town, the one just off Maplewood Estates Road, where the roots had first hidden the bodies. I felt cold seep into my bones. There was no coup de grace or photo this time, just a note, cold and direct, from someone I trusted enough to care, but also too scared to speak. Ellis had risked his safety to tell me this. The final slab. That could only mean they'd come full circle. They'd buried someone new at that ancient oak, where Egan's first victims had lain for years. I thought of those names. Harold Jenkins, the hitchhiker. Ruth Carver, the vagrant. Could there be one left? Another vulnerable soul they'd thought nobody would notice. I returned to my cruiser parked under the streetlight. The engine remained off. I folded the note, slipping it into my pocket, then grabbed my coffee, cold now, and took a long drink. I gripped the wheel and watched my reflection in the cracked windshield. Haggard, dark circles under my eyes, jaw clenched with pain and determination. The oak was only 3 miles away, and yet it felt walled off behind a haze of dread. I flicked on the headlights and steered onto Maplewood Estates Road, mind whirling with questions. Who was this final victim? Was it someone alive, or someone already dead and newly entombed? Was it someone I knew, a neighbor, a stranger, or worse, a deputy? As I turned onto the narrow road leading to the oak, the radio croaked to life. "Sheriff, we've got a hunting alert. Season's over, but someone set up a deer call near the oak. Might be activity." I replied, "I'm en route." "Notify backup. Conway and Ramirez head to Let Under Oak. Full lights. Proceed with caution." The dispatcher confirmed, and the radio went silent again. The road narrowed further, tree branches arching overhead like tied knots of black. The sun was higher now. Gone was the pale dawn, replaced by a palette of gold and green as beams filtered through new leaves. The air smelled of wet earth and budding grass. I felt the tension knot in my gut as I passed the old mercantile building, then the abandoned schoolhouse, until the oak's canopy rose ahead, huge, its trunk wide enough to hide half a man. There, under its roots, the earth had been disturbed for decades. First, a pit where Egan's victims had lain, now overgrown and reclaimed by moss and brambles. The county had tried to fill it, label it a protected spot, but it remained as a silent sentinel to horrors past. I parked the cruiser alongside the narrow pull-off. Faded yellow paint marking "no parking," now worn away. My headlights hit the base of the oak, illuminating a ring of freshly turned dirt curling around its great trunk like a rotund collar. A line of stakes driven into the soil formed a crude rectangle, 2 by 3 feet, big enough for a human to lie in, My pulse hammered so loud I could feel it in my temples. I grabbed my flashlight and revolver, moving toward the tree with slow steps. Each crunch of leaves under my boot felt like a drumbeat echoing in the stillness. The stakes gleamed where the morning light bounced off orange safety tape tied around them. In the center of the rectangle, the earth was loose and dark, pristine in contrast to the surrounding ground. I knelt and ran a gloved finger through the soil. The moisture felt wrong, too wet, too fresh. I turned my flashlight's beam upward, scanning for movement. I saw no one. My radio crackled. "Sheriff, backup is 5 minutes out. K9s are checking perimeter." I clicked the mic. "Hold position. No approach until I clear it." I returned the radio to its cradle, eyeing the pit. The disturbed dirt formed an inverted shadow under the oak, a silent promise of something terrible waiting to be exposed. I drew in a breath and signaled to Agent Ramirez, who'd just arrived. He joined me, rifle at the ready, breathing tight-nosed, eyes alert. I guided him to the edge of the rectangle. "Ramirez, we need to chip away at the top layer. Careful with forensics. Check for fresh cement residue." He nodded, crouching beside me, tools drawn. He tapped at the soil's edge, flicking away globs of damp earth, until we saw something hard, like wood. We pried upward, revealing a decayed plank, followed by a second. Underneath, a few more inches of soil pocketed the outline of something solid. My throat tightened. A sense of déjà vu crashed over me. Decades ago, that oak had swallowed souls. Now it cradled another. Ramirez called. "I see a slab." "It's there. Fresh concrete, not yet fully cured. We need trowels to carefully free it." I keyed the radio. "Bring the shovel kits, forensic team, and a crime scene truck." My mind raced with questions. Who had buried the final victim here? Someone smart enough to know the oak's history, someone wanting to finish what Egan started, or to cleanse the county of another life, believing it wouldn't matter. A moment later, Deputy Conway and K9 Officer Jenkins arrived, along with a crime scene technician dragging a bucket of trowels, brushes, evidence markers. The technician set to work, and I stepped back, feeling like I was watching a funeral unfold piece by piece. Ramirez tapped at a handful of mud around the slab's edge, flicking away 2 inches of wet cement. The smell of damp earth and curing cement stung my nose. I closed my eyes, remembering all the faces of victims we'd found. Silent mouths frozen in stone. Hopeless eyes turned to dust. Ramirez's voice crackled. "I need your boot print, Sheriff." "Step here, near the south edge." I knelt to place my foot on the cleared dirt, leaving my own print. Solid evidence that the sheriff had been here, that I'd witnessed the final secret being revealed. This was not just a crime scene. It was my county's soul laid bare. The technician called. "We have enough space to tag and remove." "Stand back." Ramirez and I backed away as the technician extended a slim, steel pry bar into the space between the slab and the earth. He tapped gently, splitting the bond between cement and soil. The slab, rectangular, roughly waist-high, shifted, cracked, and then rose, clamped by 2 technicians, carried onto a pair of wheelbarrows. Each heartbeat felt like a prayer as they set it on the grass beside the oak. We gathered around. The slab's surface was smooth, unblemished except for a single fingerprint stuck in the concrete. A partial print at the slab's edge where the hands must have clawed for release. I leaned in, breath catching. That fingerprint was alive enough to be raised, to tell a story if we could read it. Ramirez snapped a photo with his phone. "We got it. I'll send it to forensics now," he said. I advanced and eased my flashlight beam over the slab's surface. Just then, a hissing sound emanated from a crack in the wood frame. a faint rumble as though something inside struggled. I stroked my cheek, wary hands reaching for my gun until I realized it was the culprit. A nearly silent burst of gas, like the slab itself breathing. Then I saw movement. A hand curled along the slab's edge, skin pale, irritated by the pressure of cement. Under that digit, a finger flexed, as though aching to push away the slab, to gasp for air. A gasp escaped my lips as I peered closer. The form beneath was an elderly man, in his late 60s, gaunt and gray-haired, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. His eyes fluttered open, bloodshot, pupils darting with confusion. He attempted to slide upward, but the weight of the slab pinned him. My breath caught. I motioned to Conway. "Medic, now! Get him off this slab." Conway knelt beside me, pistol still in its holster but ready. He pressed a hand on the slab's edge and, with the technician's help, lifted it enough to free the man's upper torso. The slab's weight threatened to pin us too, but we held on, careful to let the slab tilt just enough. Underneath lay a network of shallow ribs, delicate collarbones, each inch of his chest heaving for oxygen. He stretched out a trembling hand to brace against the oak's roots. I slid my flashlight's beam onto his face, eyes wide with terror, mouth working in silent plea. "Sir," I said, voice low, trying to reassure while my heart threatened to explode. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." He took a rasping breath, lips curling into a shape I couldn't hear. His eyes met mine. "Sheriff, I knew you would come, but you can't stop what's coming next." His words slithered into my ears. Something in his gaze flickered between relief and something darker, an unsettling calm. I leaned in to catch his words. "They're just beginning. You found one slab, but the final one, it's already starting." Then his head slumped, eyes rolling back in exhaustion. I yelled, "Clear a path! EMS now!" Conway and Ramirez lifted him gently, sliding him onto a tarp and into a waiting ambulance. Sirens burst to life, screaming down the narrow road. I took a step back, watching as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. My mind reeled. He'd been buried alive under that oak, helpless for hours, maybe the entire night, waiting for someone to find him. And he'd known more. They're just beginning. Who was they? How many more were still to come? I grabbed the fingerprint-wrapped slab and walked it over to the crime scene truck, knowing forensics would lift the print, try to match it to our database. But my thoughts lay elsewhere. How many more had disappeared since last night? How many bodies still hid, waiting for the county's memory to catch up? And who exactly was orchestrating this renewed spree? I looked back at the oak, branches swaying coldly in the morning breeze, as though whispering a warning. There are more of us. We watch, we wait. I climbed into my cruiser, radioing dispatch. "All units stand by for search orders. We have one survivor, multiple leads, and a suspect network. Let's cordon off every wooded parcel, every abandoned structure. No place is too small." As I switched off the radio, my gaze fell again on that oak, sturdy and unyielding. I felt its roots beneath the ground, felt their cold fingers pressed against secrets. I swallowed, thought of every slab we'd chipped away, era after era, layer after layer, and realized the oak's trunk was like a living ledger, each ring marking another hidden crime. I started the engine and pulled away, driving west this time toward the sheriff's station. As I passed empty fields and abandoned barns, daylight bled across the sky, bright enough to blind, but not bright enough to banish shadows. I knew this wasn't over. The final victim under the oak's roots was only the beginning of another chapter. I didn't know who they were, if it was a lone copycat, a cult of misguided purists or a coalition of lost souls, but they were out there, sending a message that concrete couldn't hide them forever. I gripped the steering wheel as I crossed the crooked bridge over Crow Creek, watching the water swirl under the dawn's glow. Then I looked ahead. The courthouse building came into view, earnest and white, its windows reflecting the morning sun. I pulled into the parking lot, stepped out, and inhaled the smell of fresh coffee brewing inside the station. Inside, my deputy sergeant, Rivera, waited behind the front desk, face drawn, eyes hollow. "Sheriff," she said. "We got word from the hospital. The old man you rescued under the oak woke up and asked for you." I nodded. "I'll be there in a moment." I walked through the corridor that smelled of disinfectant and printer ink, down the hallway to the county hospital's critical care unit. The morning light filtered through vertical blinds, throwing shadowed lines on the linoleum floor. I pushed open the door to his room. White walls, a beeping monitor, the faint hum of ventilators. He lay on the bed, still connected to IVs, eyes closed but breathing steadily. I stepped closer, and his eyelids fluttered. "Sheriff," he croaked, weak and raspy. "Thank God." He managed a shuddering breath. I pulled a chair close and sat. "You're safe now," I said softly. He tried to speak again, throat rough. The oak, it was never just his, Agin's. The oak, it held meaning for them, something older, darker. His gaze slid beyond me to the tree, visible through the window. They came for more than vengeance. They believe the oak is sacred, a place of judgment. My heart tightened. Who is they? His gaze flickered, as if fighting to focus. They, a brotherhood, a hidden circle. They worship silence. They think by sealing bodies in concrete beneath the oak, they'll cleanse the earth. Keep it pure. I glanced at the clipboard on the bedside table. Age 68, no known address, listed as a drifter found under the oak. But now I knew more. He was their herald, left to deliver this final warning. "Where else?" I whispered. "Where's their next target? How many are in this brotherhood?" His breath hitched. "There are too many. Started years ago, but they fractured. Now they reunite, under the oak's shadow." His eyes drifted closed. "Remember, concrete hides truth, but memory prevails." And then his chest stilled, eyes still. He looked decades old in that moment, ragged, a silent sentinel's final charge. I sat in silence, breathing shallow, feeling the weight of his words more than any slab's immeasurable tonnage. I realized the oak had been their altar, a place where they returned generation after generation. Egan was only the latest iteration. Now, this brotherhood had reformed, and by some binding oath believed themselves the guardians of a dark mandate, to scour the county's edges of impurity, to entomb the unwanted in concrete as a means of moral cleansing. They'd taken Egan's gruesome legacy and elevated it into something far more dangerous, something that could outlast any single killer or sheriff. I rose from the chair and stepped to the window, gazing at the oak in the distance. The morning wind set its branches to swaying in a slow, mesmerized dance. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, a tremor of fear and purpose. The brotherhood was real, its members potentially scattered across the county, their faces unknown, and now I had a mandate to stop them, to dig out every slab, to identify every name, to sever every root that tied them to this place. They believed concrete could silence the innocent, but I knew memory was louder than stone. I pulled the curtain closed, the room going dim once more. I needed to regroup, gather resources, confide in the governor's liaison, Call in every available detective, every K-9 handler, every forensic specialist. There was no time to waste, but one thought kept echoing. The oak was their refuge and their pulpit. If I wanted to stop this, I'd have to face the oak once more. This time, not as a lone deputy digging through slabs, but as a sheriff rallying a county to root out a hidden brotherhood of killers who believed in cleansing by concrete. As I left the room, I heard the distant rasp of the oak's leaves, like ancient voices rising in warning. I took a steadying breath and stepped into the corridor. The root of the problem lay under that giant tree. Soon, I would return to Let Under Oak, armed not just with shovels and trowels, but with every ounce of resolve I possessed. I would remind this brotherhood that memory, compassion, and justice were forces concrete could never silence. And as I walked back toward the station, I felt a flicker of something, for the first time since this nightmare began, a cold determination, a promise answering the echo from beneath the oak. Their terror would not endure beyond the dawn of truth. I was crawling along Maple Ridge Road in my cruiser, headlights slicing through the darkness, when the dispatcher finally connected the call. Deputy Reed, 217 hours. Caller says there's someone standing in the tree line behind her house. My knuckles tightened on the wheel. That voice was trembling. Older woman, lived alone on the edge of the county. I tapped the mic and said, "Copy that, I'm en route." The engine's hum felt louder than usual, echoing in the silence of my cabin. Out here, after midnight, the world shrinks to the stretch of blacktop under my tires and the distant glow of porch lights. Even the radio static sounds sharper in the thin air. I pulled onto the gravel drive at Abigail Carter's place and killed the engine. The cruiser's headlights illuminated her farmhouse's peeling white paint. She stood on the porch in a wool shawl, arms wrapped tight around herself, eyes fixed on the line where yard met forest. I opened the door, boots crunching on gravel. "Ma'am," I said, voice low so as not to spook her more. She glanced at me and nodded toward the woods. Her reflection in the window was ghostly. Pale skin, wide eyes. "He's right there," she whispered. "Been there since dusk." I kept my light on, flashed it at him. Nothing moved. I swallowed and shined my spotlight toward the pines. My pulse hammered as the beam cut through branches and dark. A tall figure, at least 6'5", stood at the edge of the tree line. It wore something dark, jacket or coat, but it blended into the trunks, as though made from the shadow itself. Its arms hung straight at its sides. For a moment, I thought it might move, but it never did. Not a twitch. I signaled to Abigail, "Stay on the porch, don't go inside, I'm going to check." She nodded, voice caught in her throat. I stepped off the porch, radio clipped to my belt, flashlight in my hand. The night air was cold, crisp with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I clicked off the spotlight and crept toward the woods, every step measured. My heart beat in rhythm with each crunch of gravel. At about 100 yards, I cleared my throat and called out, "Sir, step forward and identify yourself." No answer. I raised the spotlight again. The figure still stood, head tilted slightly like it was listening. I took another step, lowering the beam. The wind rustled through the pines. My knuckles turned white on the flashlight grip. Then I heard it. A low thump, as if something heavy shifted behind leaves. I spiked the beam upward. The figure had leaned forward, at an angle that didn't look natural, tilting down toward me. I took a step back, lungs tightening, as if someone had flipped a switch inside me. The figure held that caught for a moment, then straightened and vanished into the darkness in a movement so swift I thought it was a trick of the light. No footsteps, no snapped twig, nothing except the faint sound of leaves brushing against bark. I swallowed hard and scanned the ground where it had stood. There, in the beam, was a perfect circle, roughly 3 feet across, bare earth, leaves swept away like someone had used a broom. No footprints, no signs of leaves thrown aside. Just that circle of naked dirt. My voice was low when I called in, "Dispatcher, I've got a suspicious trespasser." No visual now, but there's a circular clearing, no tracks. I'm going to back off and circle with backup. I eased backward, flashlight still trained on the circle, then turned and jogged back to Abigail's porch. She was pale, shaking as though I'd told her to run inside a burning building. "Did you see?" she asked. "Him? He just tilted like that." I nodded and said, "Backup's on the way. Stay right here. Do not go inside." She trembled, but stayed put. Sheriff Turner and Deputy Green arrived 15 minutes later, lights flashing. We formed a triangle, shining our beams into the forest. Nothing moved, but we found 2 more clearings as we fanned out. Each exactly 3 feet in diameter, exactly bare soil. The damp earth should have held footprints, but none appeared. Sheriff Turner radioed it in. 12:20, suspicious person. No footprints, multiple clearings. Possible prank or worse. I watched the sheriff's face, lined with concern. He told Green and me to secure the perimeter and check the house. We did. Abigail locked her doors and windows, refusing to go back inside until sunrise. Her eyes stayed on the tree line, as if expecting that watchful shape to reappear. I rode with Turner back to the station, radio silent except for static. The cruiser's heater whined as the temperature dipped. Turner finally said, "Reed, you seemed spooked out there. Think it's a prank?" I shook my head. Doesn't add up. No footprints, perfect circles, and those proportions weren't human. He sighed. "We'll do extra patrols. Maybe high school kids messing around." I nodded, but felt an uneasy weight settle in my gut. Something about the tilt, the way that shape held itself. It didn't feel human, and those bare circles lingered behind me like chalk outlines. 3 nights later, the Thompsons up on Cedar Hollow Road called in. 12 miles north of Carter's place, same time after sunset. Father, mother, 2 kids claimed they'd seen it since dusk. Same tall figure, same posture, same refusal to move even when they honked their horn. By the time I arrived, it was past midnight. The driveway was long, lined with cornfields. I parked under the single street lamp near their front yard. Mr. Thompson stood beside his truck, hand over his heart, staring down the rows. "Been there," he said, pointing. I clicked on the spotlight, and there it stood, 6'5", gaunt, dark clothing, still as a scarecrow. I waved Green over. She raised her light too. Our beams crossed on the figure. It didn't flinch. We approached cautiously, radio calls echoing from our chest mics in clipped tones. At 50 yards, I announced, "Crawford County Sheriff's Department. Show yourself." The figure tilted again, bending from the waist at a staggering angle as if studying us. Then, in one smooth motion, it dissolved into the night, vanishing into brush without making a sound. We rushed forward, flashlight sweeping. There, again, a circle of bare soil. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing. Just a hollow patch under the stars. The Thompsons bundled together behind the porch. Mrs. Thompson whispered, "Is it real?" I knelt by the clearing, brushing my gloved fingertips over the dirt. It felt cool, damp, like fresh rain. I looked at the horizon, no more figures. I stood and told them, "We're staying for a while." Green and I set up a perimeter, marking locations with streamers and taking soil samples. Back at the station in the morning, I filed a report. Suspected trespasser. No evidence of human entry except initial observation. Circle of bare earth, no tracks, no capture. Over the next 2 weeks, 11 more calls came in from every corner of Alderwood County, each describing the same uncanny figure. Unnaturally tall, impossibly thin, never stepping a foot forward or back, just standing like a statue. Deputies would show up, see the watcher in the tree line or at the edge of a pasture, and by the time they got close, it vanished, leaving that strange circle. We began mapping each sighting. Plotting them on the county grid revealed a rough clockwise pattern, like someone walking the perimeter of our towns. Ridgewood, Maplehurst, Pine Grove, Dryland, Millwood. The calls made a wide circuit. Local radio labeled it the Alderwood Watcher. Social media blew up with theories. Escaped mental patient, local kid in a scarecrow costume. Even references to horror stories about a tall man who stalked rural roads. But none of it fit. No sightings of this person during the day, no costume or footprints to be found. Just bare circles, empty fields, and terrified callers. Then, late November, came the first death. Abigail Carter was found in her bed. Windows closed, doors locked from the inside. Sheriff Turner and I found her slumped over in a chair by the nightstand. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no weapon. The coroner said cardiac arrest. She was 89, had a weak heart. But on her bedside table, someone, or something, had arranged buttons, coins, pebbles into a ring, exactly like the circle in the woods. Sheriff Turner brushed it aside as older lady's superstition. But I couldn't shake it. I'd seen that pattern before. And how did she have time if her heart gave out? I stared at those items under the yellow porch light leaking through the curtains. It felt like a message, something ancient and angry. In early December, 2 more calls came in, each followed by a death. Mr. McGill on Pine Grove Road, 75 years old, had reported a watcher sighting 2 nights before. Found dead in his recliner, same circular pattern of keys and coins on the table. Widow spoke of a bone-deep chill that froze him solid. Then old Mrs. Delgado on Millwood Drive. Heart attack, circle of river stones laid in a perfect ring on her floor. Sheriff Turner and I exchanged looks at the station. He kept calling it coincidence. I kept thinking pattern. The desperation in my gut grew like a wound that wouldn't close. I spent nights reading old county records and local history books by lamplight. I'd check maps, trace the circles on our grid, and dig up mentions of native burial grounds. Stillwater tribe, unmarked graves, land cleared long ago. Every assistant district attorney's office document from the 1800s had hints of sacred mounds buried beneath farm fields. I cross-referenced those with our investigation map. The alignment was sickening. Each sighting hovered just beyond the old Stillwater mounds, where settlers quietly built barns over sacred ground. I called Dr. Moore, the state's behavioral specialist. He suggested mass hysteria, fear spreading from one call to the next. Elderly folks dying of fright or natural causes triggered by panic. But when I laid out my notes about circles, clay, bare earth, he frowned. Mass hysteria doesn't explain soil disturbances. Something else is happening. He stepped back, recommending I take leave. I refused. Not until we answer these questions. On December 13th, I sat alone in the locked briefing room at 2 a.m., maps taped to the wall, markers scrawled with sighting dates. The spiral pattern of the watcher's route wrapped tighter around the county seat, Dryland. If this held, next sightings would be near my home in Millwood, 2 miles from the courthouse. My phone buzzed. Sheriff Turner. "You need rest, son." Back off. I typed, Not until I know why they're dying. And hit send. My fingers trembled. I stared at those maps, tracing the spiral like a tunnel closing in. After midnight on December 14th, I woke to a squeal of tires outside home, but no siren. Drew back the curtains and saw nothing, just the empty street. I crept to my window. Down the block, along the white picket fence, stood him, the watcher, face hidden in shadow. I dropped to my knees. He stood motionless, head turned as if listening for me. I clenched my teeth, heart tattooing my ribs. My radio lay on the counter, still powered on. I keyed it without thinking. Turner, 3:17 hours. He's here, near my house. Static flooded the speaker. I whispered, I'm coming out. I grabbed my service weapon and jacket, leaving the front door ajar. I stepped outside in socks, footsteps silent on the cool pavement. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just watched, as if I'd interrupted his patrol. I reached the yard's edge, chest tightening. The moon cast a pale glare, illuminating his long frame. I raised my flashlight. His arms swayed slightly, not humanly plausible. My legs shook. Why are you here? I demanded. He tilted forward, hips bending, weight shifted onto oddly long legs. In one blur, he vanished into the trees. I rushed forward, flashlight beam dancing over underbrush. There, on the grass, was another circle, larger this time, 30 feet across. Naked dirt ringed by gray ash and a thin scattering of clay. I knelt, prying a few grains of ash between my fingers. It smelled like burned pine, mixed with dust. I snapped pictures and texted more. Soil sample, ash plus clay. Spirals reached my yard. Next, dryland. I knew then I couldn't stay. I packed a bag in the dark, left my uniform on the bed, grabbed my car keys and slipped out without waking my wife. I stopped by the station, dropped off. My badge in the chief's box with a note, investigating, will return. My cruiser waited at the edge of town, lights off. I drove south, feeling the weight of every mile. Behind me, Millwood slept as the watcher's circle grew. By March, I'd send my resignation letter from a motel 30 miles away. The spiral never stopped tightening, and every map I drew gave me nightmares. But I never stopped tracking. Every night I filled a notepad with coordinates, soil tests, and dates. I knew he was out there, still walking that circle, still writing it into soil and fear. And I knew someday he would return for the spiral's center. I keep my radio on. It never picks up anything but static now. But sometimes, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I hear a soft tap on the motel door. I train the beam out the peephole and see a dark shape under the lamplight, taller than a man, shoulders too narrow, face gone. I step back, heart rifle shot in my chest, praying it's a trick of the mind. But when I open the door, there's nothing. Just a perfect circle of ash and clay laid on the welcome mat. I kneel, fingers trembling. The wind whispers in the pines. The spiral ends here, but I can't escape what I saw, because the watcher isn't done. It's still tracing hollow circles around my life, and I'm not sure if I'm next or if I've already been claimed. I parked my cruiser 20 miles south of Alderwood County, at a rundown motel beside a lonely diner whose neon sign flickered in the rain. My uniform lay folded on the passenger seat, badge tucked away beneath it. Nothing in my life made sense anymore. Every clear circle, every death, and now the watcher's final message on my doorstep. A ring of ash and clay that spoke of something relentless. I crossed the wet street and sat at a corner table inside the diner, the smell of grease and stale coffee clinging to my clothes. A lone waitress set a mug of black coffee in front of me without speaking. I stared into the dark liquid, the reflection of flickering fluorescent lights dancing on its surface, and wondered if I was slipping into a nightmare that had no waking. I spent most days holed up in my motel room, poring over maps spread on the bed, red lines tracing the spiral of the Watcher's route. Each concentric loop seemed to pull me deeper into something I barely understood. My nights, though, were the worst. I kept the door locked, chain-latched, yet always thought I felt a presence outside my window. The graphite-gray clouds above churned like boiling water, and every gust of wind sounded like dry leaves scraping across glass. I couldn't sleep more than a few hours at a time without waking at precisely 3:17 a.m., the hour I first saw him at my own front yard. Behind the thin plaster walls, I heard creaks and distant thuds that set my teeth on edge. I'd driven here with a handful of journals, the evidence I'd collected, soil reports, photos of clearings, handwritten witness statements from the 11 sightings and the 3 deaths. I'd also smuggled out my service weapon and my pistol. My hands still shook every time I touched the metal. Bullets felt like a poor defense against whatever stalked the darkness. I periodically checked my phone, but the battery drained quickly. I'd texted Turner and Dr. Moore once, letting them know I was alive, but neither replied. I realized they probably wrote me off. Maybe hoped I'd be found wandering in the woods, or that my obsession had finally claimed me. My only conversation these days was with scribbles in notebooks. I knew the Watcher's spiral had 8 major points: Carter's house at Maple Ridge, the Thompson farm on Cedar Hollow, the McGill place, the Delgado residence, and so on, stretching inward until only dryland remained. The last point I'd marked was my own home, now abandoned, a husk illuminated by distant streetlights. Beyond that lay dryland, the county seat, the courthouse, the old library, the parks that dotted Main Street. If the spiral continued, the next appearance had to be within dryland's city limits. I stepped out of the diner around dawn and bought a newspaper, more out of habit than curiosity. The front page carried an article about 2 more seniors found dead in their locked homes. Both had reported sightings of something watching them a week before. The coroner's office ruled both deaths natural causes, attributing each to cardiac events in patients with pre-existing conditions. Each scene had the same signature: small objects, coins, buttons, marbles, arranged in a precise circle. The reporter quoted Sheriff Turner calling the new events unfortunate, but expected in a county experiencing heightened anxiety. They avoided any mention of the Watcher or circles of ash. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Turner's statement irked me, like he was trying to force a lid on something that clearly refused to stay hidden. That evening, I left the motel and drove north, skirting the county line to avoid being seen. I headed for dryland, keeping to back roads illuminated by occasional farmhouse lights. My head throbbed with tension. Every shadow at the side of the road threatened to leap into the beam of my headlights. When I reached a bend near the old rail tracks, I saw a single figure standing close to the fence. Tall, thin, wearing a dark coat that flapped in the wind. My heart jolted. The Watcher stood motionless, staring at me. I braked, heart hammering, and rolled down the window. The chilly air rushed in, smelling of diesel and wet wood. I reached for my camera and snapped a picture, but when I raised the device, the Watcher had vanished. No rustle of footsteps, no whisper of movement. Just the wind rattling the wooden posts. I drove into dryland's deserted streets, glancing at storefronts with boarded windows. The courthouse loomed ahead, a brick structure built in 1883, its windows dark, the clock tower's hand stuck at 2 minutes to midnight. I parked across the street and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The hush pressed down on me, my breath fogged in the beam of the light. I crossed the sidewalk and approached the courthouse's front steps. On the sidewalk at my feet lay a circle of dark ash mingled with clay, smaller than previous circles, maybe 2 feet across. My toes touched it. The ash crumbled beneath my boots. No footprints around it. No signs of disturbance except the ring itself. My pulse raced. I leaned down to bag a sample in a Ziploc from my pocket, a tidy envelope labeled Dryland Circle December 17th. I snapped a few photos and texted them to Moore with one word: proof. No reply. I turned to head back to my cruiser, but the beam of my flashlight caught movement near the courthouse's north entrance. A man in a long overcoat, shoulders narrow, standing as still as a statue. He tilted forward slightly, then straightened. I swallowed, voice raw when I finally managed to speak. "Come on," I whispered to myself, stepping closer. The man, if it was a man, glided into the doorway without a sound. I raised my flashlight into the entrance. Dark corridor, peeling wallpaper, linoleum floor scuffed and cracked. I clicked off the flashlight and listened. My boots echoed as I took a step inside. The door creaked shut behind me, swallowed in the darkness. The air smelled dusty, like old papers and mildew, and my heartbeat rattled in my ears. I moved quietly, palm brushing my service weapon's grip. Every corridor branched like spokes of an old wheel. Rooms once used for offices, now empty except for discarded file cabinets. The hush was absolute, broken only by my breath and the faint hum of the old furnace somewhere beneath the floorboards. I followed the source of a whisper, soft, like someone mumbling under their breath, down a hallway lined with tall windows. The faint glow of the streetlight outside filtered through grimy glass, casting long rectangles of pale light on the walls. I crawled past open doors, each room darker than the last. I stopped at door 12, an old clerk's office. Inside, someone had scrawled a circle on the floor in ash. The center of it held a single, curled photograph, a faded picture of the Stillwater tribe's council under a great oak tree, circa 1852. I knelt and picked it up delicately. A group of native elders, dressed in traditional clothing, standing around a ceremonial fire. On the back, scrawled in pen, "They never rest." The hair on my neck prickled. I stuffed the photo into my pocket and slammed the door, nearly stumbling back into the hallway. I retraced my steps, guided by the glow of my flashlight, desperate to leave. When I reached the main entrance, I flicked the switch, no light. I cursed and yanked on the doorknob. Locked. The door didn't budge. The hush closed in, heavy as wet wool. I heard something at the other end of the corridor, a soft scraping, like fingernails against plaster. I froze, breathing ragged. My flashlight sputtered as I trained it on the far hallway, nothing but darkness and peeling wallpaper. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, too narrow shoulders, arms hanging long. It tilted, head cocked at an inhuman angle. The beam illuminated its face for a second. Empty sockets where eyes should be, mouth a darkness that seemed to swallow what little light remained. I stumbled back, the photo slipping from my grasp and fluttering like a bird's wing to the floor. The watcher drifted closer, each step silent, constellating layers of dread in my chest. My firearm felt suddenly inadequate. Without thinking, I dove to the side and pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding like a sledgehammer. The watcher paused, then lifted an arm in a gesture, one finger pointing toward the floor. I dared a glance. On the dusty linoleum, another circle had appeared, scored into the surface by something unseen. Inside that circle lay a scattering of burnt clay mixed with ash, the same mixture I'd seen at every sighting. I wanted to scream, wanted to turn and run, yet my legs refused. The watcher tilted forward more, like an old tree bending toward the wind before snapping. Its face was blank, featureless, yet I felt its gaze pin me to the floor. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath against the dim light. I slipped my hand to my belt, fingers brushing the cold steel of my pistol. Then, without warning, the watcher dissolved into the darkness, as though the walls had swallowed it. Silence reigned. I swallowed, forcing my lungs to expand. I backed up until I felt the wall against my spine, then kicked the door twice. It gave way with a groan, and I sprinted into the night, adrenaline shredding every thought. I didn't look back. The rain had started again, fat drops splattering on my face. I burst onto the cracked steps, not slowing until I reached my cruiser. I didn't stop to lock doors or worry about leaving evidence behind. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. As I peeled away, the courthouse loomed behind me. Windows dark, doors standing open, the threshold where the watcher had returned. That night, I drove to the county line and pulled into an abandoned gas station. The pumps were rusted, the roof sagged, and a single flickering lamp hung overhead. I stepped out, soaked, and lit a cigarette. The acrid smoke filled my lungs as I stared at a hand-drawn map pinned by a nail to the gas station's notice board. Someone's second-hand chart of the watcher's spiral, scribbled in shaky pen. I pressed my fingertip to the center of the spiral, Dryland Courthouse. Surrounding it, broken circles marking every sighting. Around that, a jagged, half-finished circle reaching toward the city's outskirts, a location marked Next. My throat tightened. I needed answers, but each step closer only pulled me deeper into a darkness that might never end. The wind picked up, whipping rain across my face. I dropped the cigarette and crushed it under my boot. I closed my eyes and whispered to the night, "I'm coming for you." No reply, just the distant rumble of thunder and the hum of my engine. I climbed back into the cruiser and headed south, leaving the spiral center behind me for now. I drove south until the rain eased into a mist, wipers dragging across the windshield in slow, stuttering sweeps. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest, but sleep was impossible. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, convinced the watcher might stand on the shoulder behind me, cloaked in the gloom. But there was only a blur of headlights and the smeared tunnel of wet road. I passed a sign for the next township, Pine Farms, where I decided to hole up in a cheap motel for the night. I needed a plan for reaching that next circle on the spiral without looking like another scared county deputy chasing ghosts. By the time I pulled into the deserted lot, the mist had thickened into a low-hanging fog that clung to the ground. My headlights cut two pale cones through the haze. The motel office was closed. A note taped to the glass read, "Late arrivals. Take room key from lockbox. Call 555-8912 to register." I dialed with trembling fingers. A muffled voice answered, "Room 14, $45. I punched in the code, grabbed my bag from the back seat, and headed up the narrow sidewalk, doors of rooms lining both sides like anonymous eyes in the gloom. Room 14's door squeaked when I opened it, revealing a single bed, a stained carpet, and a tiny TV perched on a scarred dresser. The remote was missing batteries. I flicked on the bedside lamp. A single bulb sputtered to life, casting yellow shadows on peeling wallpaper. I placed my notebook and camera on the nightstand and removed my wet jacket. I stripped off my shirt and jeans, leaving them crumpled on the floor. I stared at the blank TV screen. My hands shook as I poured water from the tap into the coffee pot. Instant coffee was all they offered. I let the water boil, the sound echoing off the bathroom walls until it went silent. I stirred the powder into a chipped mug and sipped. the bitterness biting at my tongue but grounding me somewhere in the present. I spread out the latest map across the bed. A bumpy spiral wound from dryland into the heart of Pine Farms, then out toward the next county line. I traced each sighting point with my fingertip, pausing at the newest location marked 10 nights ago, a farmhouse on Elmwood Road, but the owner never reported anything. Neighbors did, though. I needed to confirm that house was next on the spiral. I flipped through my notes. No direct call had come from Elmwood Road, but amateur investigators online claimed a blurry photo of the watcher came from someone's security camera there. I felt a flush of anger toward those amateurs, chasing it like a story. They weren't deputies. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. They'd never found the circles or watched the elderly die clutching their chairs. Slamming my fist against the mattress, I pinched the bridge of my nose. I'd been away from Alderwood County for weeks, but every move I made tracked back to that spiral. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stand. I retrieved my service weapon and holstered it, slipped my cell phone and pager into my pocket, and put on fresh clothes. A dark hoodie, cargo pants, and boots. I picked up my flashlight and camera, then exited the room, clicking the deadbolt behind me. The hallway was silent except for the hum of a faulty HVAC vent. I moved quietly to my car, avoiding a loose floorboard that creaked if stepped on. I sat inside, engine off, and stared at the motel's empty lot. In the haze beyond the parking lights, distant headlights illuminated a sign that read, "Vacancy," in flickering red. After a moment, I started the engine and backed onto the road. It was past midnight. The coordinates on my phone led me west along Route 47, then north onto a narrow dirt road marked Elmwood. The sign had fallen down. I nearly missed it. I turned east onto a rutted path between two fields of knee-high corn, the stalks rustling in a wind that smelled faintly of fertilizer and old rain. My headlights revealed nothing but rows of dark leaves. The GPS marker blinked. Point 12 of 15, Elmwood property. I slowed to a crawl and pointed my flashlight into the stalks. My radio hummed low, siren off, emergency lights off. I didn't want to scare off any potential evidence. I parked near the edge of the cornfield and flicked off the lights. The night swallowed the cruiser's silhouette. I stepped out and felt the ground sink slightly under my boots. Mud mixed with corn husks. The fog had grown thicker, clinging to my clothes. I clicked the flashlight on and clicked off the safety on my weapon. I started down a narrow path between rows, every step muffled. The silence felt immense, as though the world had drained of sound. After 50 yards, the rows opened into a clearing. The moon peeked through low clouds, reflecting off a low barn that leaned to the east, paint peeling and boards rotted. The structure must have been abandoned for years. The clearing's soil was churned in spots, evidence of wild animals or tractors. My flashlight beam caught a rectangular patch of bare earth near the barn wall, roughly 3 feet across. My heart stuttered. Even in the gloom, I recognized that shape. I walked closer, shining the light over the circumference. The dirt was naked. Leaves and husks swept aside. I knelt and pressed a gloved fingertip into the soil. Cool, damp, coarse with bits of ash and clay. I spun on my heel to scan the perimeter. Corn stalks rustled, but no figure stood among them. Everything felt still, almost expectant. A faint click sounded behind me, like a loose joint in the barn's framework. I spun my flashlight toward the barn's entrance. A large sliding door hung half open, swaying in the wind. The beam revealed the interior. Broken hay bales, rotted wooden beams, and shadows that could be anything. I stepped toward the door, every sense tuned like a taut wire. The only other sound was the steady drip of rain that had begun once more, now striking the tin roof with a hollow beat. I crossed the threshold into darkness deeper than I expected. My beam grazed the floor. Boards sagged under pockets of damp hay. Something scuffled beyond the reach of my light. I clicked my tongue, trying to force the sound back, and the hush returned. I flicked the flashlight to the left. A broken crate, hand-carved letters on its side, Stillwater artifact, property of D. Carter, and the rest illegible. My breath caught. I remembered Abigail Carter. Her home had been the first point on the spiral. Now here lay a crate bearing her name, or something bearing her name, overgrown with rot and mold. I crouched to inspect deeper. Inside was splintered wood, scraps of cloth, and a tattered scrap of paper. I touched it gently. The paper felt brittle. I unfolded it in the dim beam. It bore the same group photograph I'd found in the courthouse. A Stillwater council team standing around a small fire in front of a great oak. In the margins, a childlike scrawl. They rise to complete the circle. My heart slammed. I pocketed the scrap and stood, wiping moisture from my fingertips. At that moment, a rustle echoed from above, inside the rafters. I tilted my light upward to catch a silhouette perched on a beam, long, narrow shoulders, no face visible in the darkness. Instinct took over. I raised my weapon and fired, the report roaring like thunder inside the barn. Wood splintered. I raced outside, heart pounding so fiercely I nearly collapsed. The cornfield line shook as something large slipped into the stalks. I fired again into the darkness. My vision reeled with each recoil. Breathing ragged, I turned away from the barn and sprinted toward my cruiser, sinking in mud. My flashlight skidded across the ground, flickering out. I reached the cruiser and slammed the door, fumbling for the keys. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed a figure standing by the barn's entrance. Tall, narrow, clothes hanging loose, tilting at that impossible angle. It watched me go. I didn't stop until I reached a small motel on the far side of Pine Farms, then drove another hour south to a place called Willow Creek. I needed distance, clear thinking, but doubt clawed at me. Had I really hit something? Or someone? The barn had returned a bullet's worth of splintered wood, but no body, no blood, nothing. The soil sample in my glove box was damp, still warm from where I had knelt. I pressed the ash between my fingers in the motel parking lot, feeling grit beneath my skin. I tore open the scrap of paper from the crate, the still water photograph. Edges charred as if set to burn but rescued at the last moment. I stared at the faces of the elders, their eyes captured in black and white. Pristine, calm. Under their feet, leaves scattered at their feet like confetti. At the bottom, a single line in the same shaky scrawl. Complete the circle. Inside the motel room, I sat on the sagging bed and laid the photograph beside my field notebook. My phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Moore. He wrote, "Reed, seen the sample? Confirmed human ash plus local clay. Need you back ASAP. If you fired at it, we have a problem." I didn't respond. I stared at the keyboard, thumbs trembling. The words on the scrap of paper seemed to burn into my mind, complete the circle. Each sighting, each death, each circle of dust was part of a ritual beyond my understanding. And now I'd shot at it, perhaps offended it. I'd shattered part of its body, if it even had a body. The wind rattled the motel window, carrying a faint tap, like fingernails on glass. My breath hitched. For a moment it was silent. Then another tap, closer, lighter, deliberate. I slipped off the bed and inched toward the window. parting the threadbare curtain. The parking lot was empty except for a lone street lamp casting a dim halo. I scanned the ground outside, the hum of the heater followed by my own ragged breathing. I tapped the window with a forefinger, once, twice, calling out to myself that it was nothing. Then I saw it. A circle neatly etched in ash and clay sprawled across the patch of grass outside the lamp's reach. It was slightly larger than the one I'd seen at the courthouse, and right at its center lay the barn photograph scrap, placed face down so I couldn't see its message. My chest tightened. I stepped back, mind racing. The circle on the grass felt like a warning, a final piece of the spiral laid at my feet. I fumbled for my phone, dialing Moore's number again, but the line went straight to voicemail. I closed my eyes, hearing the motel's hum, the wind through the trees, and that faint rhythmic tapping, like a heartbeat just beyond the glass. I whispered to the empty room, "It's here." The tapping continued, slow, unyielding, counting down something I couldn't name. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the bed. My field notebook lay open beside me, scribbled with coordinates, soil readings, and names of those who died: Carter, Thompson, McGill, Delgado. 14 victims and 14 circles. Now 15, with my own motel room at the spiral's outer rim. I realized I was one turn away from the final point, a place I had no choice but to visit, but the thought of returning made bile rise in my throat. The tapping stopped. Silence reigned for a heartbeat, then resumed, this time from right behind me. I spun, weapon raised, heart slamming. The room was empty, shadows pooled in corners but nothing moved. My flashlight flickered on by the door, illuminating the wall clock's hands stuck at 3:17 a.m. The same hour everything began. I exhaled, but my breath stuck in my throat as a low creak came from the ceiling vent above me. I aimed my flashlight upward. In that vent's grate, I saw a dark shape, too narrow for a bird, too tall for a rat, leaning down. The beam caught a smudge where eyes should be, but there were no eyes, only a dark void reflecting the light. Its head tilted at a wrong angle, staring at me through the grate. I backed into the corner, weapon trembling in my hand. "What do you want?" I rasped. The shape didn't move except to tilt further, as though acknowledging my presence. Then it slipped back into darkness, swallowed by the rafters. The vent's grate rattled once, twice, then stillness came like a curse. I sank to the bed, breath rattling, mind racing. The ring outside the window, the scrap of paper in the circle, the figure above me. I had nowhere left to run. My phone vibrated. Moore's text. "Reed, we need to talk. Now." I stared at it, unable to respond. The tapping began again on the glass, slower this time, deliberate. One tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening. My heart pounded so fiercely I expected it to burst. 1, 2, 3, a final, echoing tap, and then nothing. The room plunged into silence, but I knew it wasn't over. I slid off the bed and grabbed my coat, stepping toward the open window. Rain had loosened, leaving the grass slick. I knelt and scraped a handful of ash from the circle. It felt alive, warm, pulsing under my fingertips. I stared at the scrap of paper at its center but dared not pick it up. My phone buzzed again. "Reed, if you see this, call me." I crumpled the phone in my hand and walked outside into the mist. At the edge of the motel parking lot stood one last figure in the fog. Taller than the neon sign, shoulders too narrow, face hidden beneath a hood. It tilted forward, watched me with that hollow gaze. I raised my flashlight, but the beam faltered before reaching it. I shouted, "What do you want from me?" The mist swallowed my voice. The figure stepped forward, no sound but the pulse of the ash under my boot. In that moment I understood. The spiral never ends. It converges only to break you. The figure lifted one pale, shadowy hand and pointed toward the horizon, where the faint outlines of no man's land awaited. Land I'd never name, but felt I had to cross. I stepped back, heart pounding, and the figure vanished, swallowed by the fog. In its place lay a single, fresh circle, larger than all the others, spanning nearly 8 feet, etched in dark ash and clay. At its center rested my service badge, tarnished but unmistakable. Deputy Daniel Reed. My breath caught. I bent to retrieve it, pressing it into my palm. I ran my thumb over my name, feeling the metal's cold weight. The mist coiled around me like a living thing. I took a deep breath and stepped into the circle that lay half hidden in the fog, letting the ash and clay sift between my boots. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to turn around, but I forced myself forward. My flashlight cast a narrow beam that trembled with each step. The edges of the circle were clearly defined, an inky ring of damp ash and clay, undisturbed by wind or rain, as though someone had laid it carefully that very moment. I felt the weight of my badge pressing into my thigh pocket, and I couldn't help noticing how small and fragile it felt now, like a token from a life I would never reclaim. Behind me, the motel's neon vacancy sign had died, and in its place only the fog remained, swirling with secrets. The circle spanned almost 8 feet across. Its center held nothing but a blank patch of ground, so black it absorbed the flashlight beam, giving no hint of what lay beneath. I inched toward that dark center, and the ground felt strangely warm under my boot. My heart pounded so hard I could almost feel my pulse in my ears. I knelt and scooped a handful of ash. It felt finer than any dirt I'd ever touched, less like burned wood and more like something ground from bones. I rubbed it between 2 fingers, tasting the dust's cold grit, and realized it carried an acrid tang that reminded me of old cremation urns I'd seen in state mortuaries. This wasn't just clay or forest ash. Something about it felt intimately familiar, like it came from somewhere I'd only glimpsed in nightmares. I stood and shone the flashlight across the circle's perimeter. The fog formed a shifting wall that glowed faintly in the beam, tracing the circle's outline in silver. Beyond that, nothing. No trees, no motel, only the hush of damp air. I clicked off the flashlight and let my eyes adjust, staring into the heart of the circle. The darkness there seemed absolute, an absence that resisted being illuminated. And then I heard it, soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind but growing louder. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, coming from somewhere within the circle. I felt the volume of the fog tighten around me, funneling the sound. My breath caught in my throat, and my grip on my pistol tightened so hard my knuckles turned white. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt clogged. The footsteps stopped. Now only my breathing filled the silence. I raised my flashlight again, circling its beam slowly from left to right. At the far edge of the circle, something shifted, a shape solidifying out of the mist. It stood hunched and narrow, limbs too long, clothing dark as spilled ink. For a moment I thought it was the watcher, and I braced myself to fire, but then the shape blinked. A face emerging from the fog with hollow eye sockets and lips etched in a silent scream. Something in that face made me stagger backward. I tripped over my own feet, catching myself on the damp ground, pistol clattering to the earth. My flashlight skidded across the ash, illuminating a line of meticulously placed river stones that led from the edge of the circle to the center, diagonal across the path I'd taken in. Someone, or something, had arranged them with care. The stones were slick with ash, each one smoothed by time, as though dragged, from a riverbank and laid here to mark this very place. My stomach churned at the thought. I was standing on a path someone, something, had created for me. The shape at the circle's edge moved with a jerk, tilting its head at a wrong angle. Its body looked like a suit that had been stretched over an invisible frame of bones. The face that shone in my beam was not human. I swallowed hard, tasting copper on my tongue, and scrambled backward, boots churning the ash. My pistol lay just out of reach. I stretched my arm to grab it, but the figure had drifted closer. Each step it took left no footprint in the ash, only a faint ripple in the clay. When it was 10 feet away, I had to leap backward to clear the center stones. The flashlight rolled in my palm, beam wild, illuminating the creature's chest. Veins mapped across its skin in thick, dark lines that pulsed slowly, as if it were breathing. But I saw no rise and fall, only those veins throbbing under a sickly pallor. I fumbled for my pistol, finally clasping its grip. I rose, half-crouched, pistol raised. It watched, head tilting, as though analyzing whether I belonged in its domain. Then it spoke, a low, rasping hiss that stole all sound from the night except its own voice. "Deputy Reed," it said, and the syllables scraped against my eardrums like stones. "You carried your badge all this way." I swallowed, jaw clenched. "What do you want?" I rasped. The flashlight wavered in my sweaty hand, casting a jittery glow across its sunken cheeks. Its eyes held no pupils, only empty hollows that seemed to drink the light. "You asked to see me," it said, tilting forward. "Here I am." My stomach reeled. "This isn't a laugh," I managed to choke out. "Tell me how this ends." The figure's head bobbed once, as though nodding. "Not how you want." Behind me, the circle's ash shimmered as though disturbed by an unseen wind. I turned to face it, shining my flashlight on the ground. The stones at my feet glowed faintly, revealing hidden markings carved into each. A swirl, a spiral, runes that I couldn't read. I knelt and brushed my fingers across one. It felt carved into the river stone as though someone, still someone, had scratched it here in the darkness. I recognized the symbol as the same spiral I'd drawn on my maps, but here it lay in stone, primitive and immutable. I traced it with shaking fingertips and felt a wave of vertigo wash over me. My mind spun with the realization. This circle was not random. It was a point in a larger spiral, and I was at the threshold of something vast and ancient. The river stones marked a path that led inward, deeper than this motel lot, deeper than the county archives, deeper than memories of the Stillwater tribe. It ran into darkness beyond comprehension. The Watcher, if that is what it truly was, took a step forward, so silent I barely heard it. My pistol wavered in my grip. The fog churned around its ankles as it crossed the circle's rim. The ash parted under its feet, falling away to reveal broken earth beneath. I watched, horrified, as the ground within the circle sank slightly beneath its weight. There was a soft hissing sound, small stones clicking together as though shifting in a current. The mist around its ankles twirled, tightening into a column that wrapped around its form, obscuring the details of its face once more. "Why these people?" I whispered, voice cracking. "Why my county?" The figure raised what passed for a hand, fingers too long, veins still visible. It traced an arc in the air, an invisible line connecting one point to the next. I felt it form in my mind, the spiral that marked every sighting, every death, every circle of ash in Alderwood County. I realized that those victims had been markers, sacrifices along the path the Watcher traced. Their deaths had fueled this spiral, and now it circled to its center. Me. I took a step back, dragging the river stone I'd held backward across my flashlight beam. The symbol glowed faintly in the pale light, etched so deeply only bone could carve it. I realized I was meant to complete the spiral, to fill that final circle with my own presence. I wanted to run, but my boots felt heavy, as though rooted to the thick clay. My pistol felt impossibly far away. The watcher tilted its head, studying me, then pointed to my chest, where my badge lay tucked in my jacket. I unzipped my hoodie and pulled out the metal shield, holding it in my shaking hand. It felt cold, unnatural, a token of an authority that now meant nothing. "Then take it," I whispered. "Take the badge." The watcher's hollow eyes seemed to burn with pleasure. It took a gliding step forward, and the air inside the circle shivered, as though something beneath the earth was waking. I held the badge out, and as soon as my fingers parted it from my chest, I felt a jolt, as though I'd laid my heart on the ground. The badge slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the stones at my feet. The moment it landed, a yabome, low rumble shook the earth. The circle's ash shifted in concentric ripples, then rolled inward toward the center, revealing a black hole in the ground, roughly 2 feet wide and yawning. From that void rose a cloud of black smoke, carrying faint cries, echoes of frightened voices and slammed doors. My microphone crackled in my pocket, and I heard my own panicked breaths fed back to me. I stumbled backward, away from the void, but my feet barely moved. The watcher turned toward the center, raising its arms as if conducting the rising storm. The smoke swirled, forming vague shapes. Abigail Carter's face, Mr. McGill's face, Mrs. Delgado's face, twisted in permanent terror. They flickered in and out of view, then drifted back into the void, replaced by new faces, mine, caught forever in the motel room mirror. My wife's face haunted, searching. My son's face, pale with worry. They hovered at the edge of sight, tugging on me like ghosts pleading for salvation. The wind howled through the empty lot, scattering ash across the motel parking spaces, and I felt the spiral of memories tighten like a noose. My knees buckled. I dropped to the ground, pistol clanging across the ash. I scrambled for it, anywhere to feel some control. My hand closed around the cold metal. I looked at the watcher, ready to fire. But when I squeezed the trigger, a single shot rang out, and the watcher recoiled as though wounded. The smoke roared in pain, swirling faster, its cries growing louder. But the watcher did not fall. Instead, it seemed to merge with the black smoke, dissolving itself into the vortex. The void on the ground widened, and the mist pulled at me, drawing me forward. I aimed the pistol at the center of that void, but my arms shook so violently I couldn't hold it steady. I closed my eyes, thinking of home, of my wife, of my son, and tried to pull back. But the spiral's pull was too strong. My boots slid forward in the ash. I felt hands, cold, unseen, clutch at my ankles, then at my waist, dragging me toward the void. The ashes swirled at my knees, climbing, smothering my boots. I tried to scream, but only a rasp escaped. My fingertips brushed the edge of the circle's rim, and a flash of light dazzled me. When I opened my eyes, the watcher, or what remained of it, stood at the far edge of the circle, arms lowered, head tilted as though curious. Its empty eyes watched me as I was yanked inch by inch toward the void. I raised the pistol, teeth clenched, firing into the vortex. The shot echoed hollowly. The black smoke surged forward, and I felt it invade my mind with images. Barns ablaze, barns flattened, barns empty, trees stripped of leaves in a spiral pattern, bodies of the dead, arms outstretched in circles of ash. The voices in the smoke chanted something I couldn't hear but felt deep in my bones. a promise, a binding contract written in fear. The pistol fell from my hand, clattering to the stones. I tried to lift my arms, but weight pressed down on me, as though gravity itself had flipped. The last thing I saw before the void swallowed me was the Watcher's face, empty, satisfied, as though it had been waiting for this moment for a century. All at once I was pulled into darkness. There was no bottom, no end, just the oppressive void smothering me. The cries of the dead merged with my own scream, then a flash. A single point of white light far above me, distant but beckoning. I reached for it, every ounce of strength, but the void yanked me back, disorienting me, forcing me deeper. My vision blurred. My heartbeat slowed. Then it stopped altogether and I slipped into emptiness. I don't know how long I stayed in that void. Time lost all meaning. But eventually I began to feel warmth, like embers glowing faintly in my mind. I opened my eyes to see the world again, but upside down, sunk into a shallow pit lined with damp clay. The Watcher stood over me, silhouetted against a pale circle of dawn light. I was bruised, bloodied, but still alive. My uniform lay torn around me. The motel's neon sign flickered in the distance, and I realized I was back at the edge of that circle, near the grass where the ash had once lain. I tried to move. My limbs felt heavy, as though weighed by some terrible memory. The Watcher kneeled beside me, pressing its long, narrow fingers to my chest. I expected pain, but felt only a cold calm sliding through my bones. Its empty gaze bored into mine, and I understood. I was chosen to remain, to become part of the spiral itself. The words I'd heard in the void returned. Complete the circle. A seed of dread sprouted in my mind. I knew I had no choice. Slowly, I raised my arm and plucked a river stone from where it lay embedded in the mud. I placed it on the ground and felt something shift. Around me, ash began to rise from the earth, forming a faint outline of a circle. More stones rose like magnets from the clay, aligning themselves in concentric rings. I forced a breath, tasting dirt and fear. The Watcher's hand rested on my shoulder, guiding me. I reached forward, picking up another stone and placing it in the ring. With each stone, the circle filled in, ash swirling in thin layers until the entire pit glowed with its pale luminescence. I stepped back, shaking, and viewed what I had done. I had completed the penultimate circle. Only one ring remained, the outermost boundary connecting the circle to the world beyond. The Watcher rose, beginning to fade into mist as the outer ash lifted off the ground. Its voice echoed in my mind. You belong now. The fog receded, revealing the motel parking lot as it had been before, but with one addition, a large, perfect circle of raised ash nearly 10 feet across. At its center lay my badge, tarnished and blunt, waiting for me to claim it again. My knees buckled. The Watcher's face, the hollow, featureless face, briefly flickered before the shape dissolved completely. I was alone. I sank to the ground, tears mingling with rain-soaked ash on my cheeks. I realized that every step I'd taken, every person who died, every circle I'd found had been part of a pattern I never chose but was forced into. The spiral was mine now. I reached into the center of that new circle and closed my hand around my badge, feeling its familiar weight. I pressed it over my heart. My breath steadied. The ash under my feet pulsed, responding to that touch. I let the badge fall out of my palm, landing with a faint clink on the ash. As it did, the ash ring rose, lifting off the ground like smoke caught in a wind. The badge floated upward, spinning slowly, until it hovered in midair above the circle's center. A chill zipped down my spine. I scrambled backward, but the badge remained aloft, and the ash beneath it formed symbols in a language older than any I had studied. It spelled a single word: origin. My pulse hammered. The circle's outline glowed brighter, illuminating 5 more faint shapes beyond the motel: a barn on Elmwood Road, a farmhouse on Maple Ridge, a porch on Cedar Hollow, a recliner on Pine Grove, and a bed on Millwood Drive. Each place of death now marked with a shimmering ring in the pre-dawn light. I looked at the badge swirling above the ash. It gleamed with an otherworldly radiance, and I felt the tug of that center calling me, beckoning me to step inside. I realized then what the Watcher wanted. I was meant to carry this spiral into the world, to stand at its origin and watch as it unfurled its rings outward, bringing the same horror to every county and town that lay beyond Alderwood. The badge was no longer mine to keep. It was a beacon, a signal to the Watcher's domain. If I left it in that circle, the spiral would continue without me. If I took it, I would become the spiral. I scrambled to my feet, mind reeling. Lightning crackled on the horizon. I stepped toward the badge, then recoiled. The ash made a low hum, vibrating beneath my boots. I reached for my pistol, but it lay half buried in ash near the circle's rim. I crawled toward it, each movement sending tremors through the ash. My hand closed on the cold metal. I aimed it at the floating badge. Tears blurred my vision. If I shot it down, the spiral might collapse, or it might shatter me instead. I squeezed the trigger, and the muzzle flash lit the mist like a flare. The badge quivered, then dropped, thudding on the ash. The circle's glow flickered, then pulsed outward in waves. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the badge clanked and settled at the circle's center, sinking into the ash until only its top edge glinted. The ash flared and then collapsed inward, collapsing the circle into dust. In its place was a small mound of ash, a single river stone placed on top, carved with the same spiral I'd seen in so many places. I stared, heart pounding. The motel loomed behind me, windows dark, but I felt I was no longer in that world alone. I felt tied to something older than any memory. I backed away, turning toward the road. As I stepped off the asphalt onto the damp grass, I heard a low rumble that I recognized from the void, a pulse, like a heartbeat that echoed deep within the earth. I turned back to look at the mound. For an instant, I thought I saw the river stone's spiral glow faintly. Then nothing, just gray ash, silent and still. I walked away, trudging through damp grass, leaving Motel 6-4 behind. I didn't look back until I reached my cruiser. The badge was gone, buried in that ash for good. I slid behind the wheel and started the engine. My reflection stared back at me from the windshield. Hollow-eyed, exhausted, irrevocably changed. I tore off down the road toward home, if you could call anywhere home after this. I drove past the barns and the cornfields, the abandoned farmhouse, and the silent roads where children once saw something watching them. Now I watched those places instead, knowing each lay at the edge of a spiral that reached into far, more than one county. The sun rose behind me, but the sky remained dim, as though the world had held its breath and refused to exhale. Somewhere, deep in the farmland, a new circle of ash was forming, waiting for the next witness. I realized then that a circle never truly closes. It ends only where new circles begin, and the spiral spins onward in silent patience. I kept driving until the horizon swallowed me whole, but I never escaped the knowledge that the Watcher's domain stretched beyond sight. And in that stark dawn, I understood that some spirals can never be broken. They simply demand new hands to carry the pattern forward, and if I refused, it would find someone else. Some other soul who heard a whisper at 3:17 a.m., saw a circle of ash in the mist, and felt the pull of something ancient, beckoning to complete the spiral. I reached the county line gate and stopped. My reflection in the cracked mirror was gone. I was a stranger to myself. In my pocket was a single river stone, smooth and cold. I held it, feeling the spiral carved into its surface, and I knew I had a choice. Take it with me and keep the spiral alive, or throw it back and hope someone else found it. I squeezed it tightly until my knuckles burned with pain. Then I opened my hand. The stone thudded against the asphalt. A gust of wind carried it into the fields, where it skittered into the tall grass and disappeared from sight. I exhaled, thinking that might end it here. But as I turned the ignition and pulled through the gate, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw, just for a moment, a ripple of ash drifting along the road behind me. Then nothing but morning light and clear air. I drove on,